The bloodstains on the kitchen floor weren't there when I left for work this morning, but Virginia swears they've always been there, just like she swears about everything else that doesn't make sense anymore. The fluorescent lights of my cubicle buzzed overhead as I mindlessly scrolled through search results for our upcoming anniversary dinner reservations. 10 years of marriage deserved something special, and Virginia had been dropping hints about that new French place downtown for months. I typed Anniversary Restaurants Philadelphia into Google, but my finger slipped on the trackpad, and somehow Virginia Morrison Obituary Philadelphia appeared in the search bar instead. I started to delete it, but something made me hesitate. My wife's maiden name was Morrison, Virginia Morrison. The cursor blinked mockingly at the end of the search term. I hit enter. The first result made my stomach lurch sideways. Philadelphia Inquirer, local woman dies in house fire. Virginia Morrison, 34, of Germantown, died Tuesday evening when flames engulfed her two-story home on Walnut Lane. Fire marshal reports indicate the blaze started in the kitchen around 8:30 p.m. Morrison was found unconscious in the hallway, apparently attempting to escape. She was pronounced dead at Temple University Hospital. Funeral services will be held. The date on the article was 8 years ago, March 15, 2015. My hands trembled as I clicked the link. The article loaded with a photograph. A house reduced to charred timber and twisted metal, smoke still rising from the ruins. But it was the smaller photo that made me stop breathing entirely. The victim's picture. It was Virginia. My Virginia. The same heart-shaped face, the same auburn hair, the same small scar above her left eyebrow from when she fell off her bike as a child. The caption read, Virginia Morrison, 34, died in Tuesday's house fire. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered. This had to be some kind of mistake. A different Virginia Morrison. Philadelphia was a big city. There had to be thousands of people with that name, but the address listed was 1247 Walnut Lane, Germantown. We lived at 1249 Walnut Lane, Germantown, next door. I called Virginia immediately, my fingers fumbling over the numbers. Hey, honey. Her voice came through clear and warm, exactly as it always did. Missing me already? I'm just at the grocery store. Need anything? Where are you exactly? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Whole Foods on Germantown Avenue. Why? You sound weird. Nothing, just, can you send me a selfie? She laughed. A selfie? What are we, teenagers? Fine, give me a second. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Virginia grinning at the camera, fluorescent lighting washing out her features, shopping cart visible behind her. Definitely alive. Definitely real. Feel better? She texted. I called her back. Yeah, sorry, just had a weird moment at work. Well, hurry home. I'm making your favorite tonight, chicken parmesan. After she hung up, I stared at the obituary again. The woman in the photo looked exactly like my wife, but the details were wrong. The article said Virginia Morrison was unmarried, worked as a dental hygienist, and had no surviving family. My Virginia worked at the insurance company downtown, and we'd been together since college. I screenshotted the article and forwarded it to my personal email, then cleared my browser history. Something nagged at me about the neighboring address, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The house next door to ours had been empty for as long as we'd lived there. Virginia always said the previous tenants moved out before we arrived, and the landlord was having trouble finding new renters. I'd never given it much thought, but now I realized I'd never actually seen anyone go in or out of 1247. Never seen mail delivered, never seen lights on at night. I Googled the address with House Fire 2015 and found 3 more articles, all with the same details. Virginia Morrison, dental hygienist, died alone in a kitchen fire. No surviving relatives. Services held at Laurel Hill Cemetery. The drive home took forever. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Virginia to text that she was back from shopping, but nothing came through. When I finally pulled into our driveway, her car wasn't there. I walked over to 1247 and peered through the front windows. The interior was completely gutted, charred walls, no furniture, floorboards warped and blackened. It looked exactly like a house that had burned down 8 years ago and never been repaired. But if that was true, why had we never smelled smoke? Why had no one ever mentioned a fire? Why were there no signs, no condolence flowers, no insurance investigators? I pulled out my phone and called Virginia again, straight to voicemail. "You've reached Virginia. Leave a message, and I'll call you back." Her voice sounded strange, flat, like she was reading from a script. I walked back to our house and let myself in. Everything looked normal. Virginia's coffee mug in the sink, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter, her shoes by the front door. The familiar scent of her perfume lingered in the hallway. But something felt different. Wrong. I went to our bedroom and opened her dresser drawers. All her clothes were there, neatly folded. Her jewelry box sat on the nightstand, music tinkling softly when I lifted the lid. A small ballerina twirled in circles just like always. In the back of the jewelry box I found something I'd never seen before. A small brass key, tarnished with age. I turned the key over in my palm, feeling its weight. It was old-fashioned, the kind that might fit an antique lock or a safe deposit box. Virginia had never mentioned it, and I thought I knew every piece of jewelry she owned. My phone buzzed. A text from Virginia. "Running late. Traffic terrible. Home by 7. I looked at the timestamp. 6:45 p.m. She'd been at the grocery store for over 4 hours. I called Whole Foods on Germantown Avenue. "Hi, I'm wondering if you have security footage from this afternoon. My wife was shopping there and I think she might have left her wallet." "Sir, we can't share security footage with customers. If your wife lost her wallet, she should come in and speak with customer service." "Can you at least tell me if a woman named Virginia was there today? Auburn hair, about 5'6". "I'm sorry, I can't give out information about specific customers." I hung up and stared at the key again. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe Virginia had inherited it from her grandmother or found it at an antique shop. She was always picking up random trinkets. But then I remembered that Virginia claimed she had no family. Both her parents died when she was young, she said, and she'd been in foster care until she aged out of the system. No siblings, no aunts or uncles, no grandparents. It was one of the things that drew us together. We were both essentially alone in the world. So where would she have gotten an antique key? I searched through the rest of her belongings. In the back of her closet, behind the winter coats, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside were documents I didn't recognize. A birth certificate for someone named Vera Morrison, born the same day as Virginia, but in Pittsburgh instead of Camden. A social security card with a different number than the one I knew. And underneath those, a stack of newspaper clippings, all obituaries, all for women named Virginia, or variations like Ginny, Ginger, Veronica. All died in house fires, all within the past 10 years. My hands shook as I read through them. Virginia Chen, 29, Bakersfield, CA, died in kitchen fire, 2014. Ginger Williams, 31, Austin, TX, died in electrical fire, 2016. Veronica Stone, 28, Cleveland, Och, died in grease fire, 2017. Virginia Rodriguez, 33, Tampa, FL, died in accidental fire, 2018. 12 obituaries in total. 12 different women, different cities, different backgrounds, but they all had the same basic details. Young women, living alone, died in house fires, no surviving family. And at the bottom of the stack, printed from the Philadelphia Inquirer website, was the obituary I'd found that afternoon. Virginia Morrison, 34, died in house fire, 2015. I heard the front door open. "Honey, I'm home," Virginia's voice called from downstairs. "Sorry I'm so late, you wouldn't believe the traffic." I shoved everything back into the box and locked it, slipping the key into my pocket. By the time she reached the bedroom, I was sitting on the bed pretending to scroll through my phone. "How was your day?" she asked, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Her lips felt cold. "Fine. Boring. You know how it is." She studied my face for a moment. "You look pale. Are you feeling okay?" "Just tired." "Well, dinner will cheer you up." I got everything for chicken parmesan, plus that wine you like. I followed her downstairs and watched her move around the kitchen. She pulled ingredients from bags that weren't there when I'd arrived home. The refrigerator was now fully stocked with groceries I hadn't seen her bring in. When did you have time to put everything away? I asked. What do you mean? The groceries. Your car wasn't here when I got home, but the fridge is full. She paused, a package of chicken in her hands. I brought them in through the back door. Didn't want to make extra trips. But we didn't use the back door. It had been painted shut since we moved in, and we'd never bothered to fix it. I'd tried to open it once to let some fresh air through the house, and it wouldn't budge. Did you fix the back door? Fix it? It's never been broken. I walked over and tried the handle. It turned easily, opening onto our small backyard. The door moved smoothly on its hinges, as if it had been used regularly for years. Weird, I said. I thought it was stuck. You must be thinking of a different door. But we only had 2 doors, front and back. There wasn't another door to confuse it with. I watched Virginia cook, looking for something different, something that would explain the newspaper in the box upstairs. She moved with the same familiar gestures, humming the same tune she always hummed while cooking. Everything seemed normal, except for the way she kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Virginia, I said carefully, do you remember where you were born? Camden, New Jersey. You know that. And your parents? Died in a car accident when I was 7. I've told you this story 100 times. What were their names? She turned to face me fully, wooden spoon in her hand. Why are you asking me these questions? I just realized I don't think I've ever heard their names. Robert and Linda Morrison. What did they do for work? Dad was a mechanic. Mom was a teacher. She turned back to the stove, but I caught her reflection in the window above the sink. Her expression was tight, concentrated, like she was trying to remember lines from a play. What school did you go to? For what? Elementary school, high school, college. The wooden spoon clattered against the edge of the pan. Why are you interrogating me? Did something happen at work today? I'm just curious. We've been married 10 years, and I realize there are things I don't know about you. You know everything important? But that was the problem. I was starting to realize I didn't know anything at all. That night, I lay awake, listening to Virginia breathe beside me. Her rhythm was different, too regular, too controlled, like she was concentrating on maintaining the pattern. When I was sure she was asleep, the house next door was dark, as always. But now I could see the fire damage clearly in the moonlight, the warped siding, the boarded windows, the collapsed section of roof. How had I never noticed it before? I pulled on my robe and quietly made my way downstairs. The back door that had supposedly never been broken stood slightly ajar, letting in the cold March air. I was certain I'd closed it after testing the handle earlier. Outside, the night was crisp and silent. I walked to the fence separating our properties and peered over into the next yard. The grass was overgrown and wild, weeds pushing through cracks in what had once been a concrete patio. A rusted barbecue grill sat overturned near the back door. This was not the yard of a house that had been maintained or occupied within the last 8 years. I climbed over the fence, my bare feet sinking into the cold, wet grass. The back door of 1247 hung loose on its hinges, revealing the gutted interior I'd glimpsed through the front windows. The smell hit me immediately, smoke and ash and something else underneath, something organic and rotten. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to illuminate the interior. The kitchen was completely destroyed, appliances melted into unrecognizable shapes, cabinets reduced to skeletal frames. The floor was a maze of charred boards and debris. But in the corner, barely visible under a pile of burned timber, I saw something that made my stomach clench. A shoe. A woman's shoe, scorched but still recognizable. I'd seen Virginia wear shoes exactly like it. I picked my way carefully across the unstable floor and knelt beside the debris pile. The shoe was a size 7, the same size Virginia wore. It was a brown leather flat with a small decorative buckle. the same style she'd bought last spring and worn constantly until she claimed they'd worn out. But Virginia's shoes were in our front hallway. I'd seen them when I came home that afternoon. I used a piece of burned wood to move aside more debris, and my light fell on something that made me stumble backward. A human skeleton, curled into a fetal position, still wearing the remnants of a floral dress. The fabric had partially survived the fire, and I recognized the pattern. Virginia had a dress just like it in her closet. Or at least she used to. I ran back to our house, my heart hammering against my ribs. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and eased open our bedroom door. Virginia was still in bed, still breathing in that 2 regular rhythm. I went to her closet and searched through her dresses. The floral one wasn't there, but I remembered her wearing it. I remembered complimenting her on it just a few weeks ago. She'd smiled and said it was one of her favorites, that she'd had it for years. I checked her shoe rack. The brown flats were there, exactly where they should be. But I'd just seen an identical pair on the feet of a skeleton next door. I needed to think rationally. Maybe the previous tenant had similar taste in clothes. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe I was losing my mind. I went to the kitchen and opened my laptop, searching for more information about the fire at 1247 Walnut Lane. The articles I found repeated the same basic facts, but one included additional details. Fire investigators believe the blaze started when Morrison left cooking oil unattended on the stove. Neighbors reported seeing smoke around 8:30 p.m., but by the time firefighters arrived, the flames had spread throughout the first floor. Morrison's body was discovered in the hallway between the kitchen and living room, suggesting she had been trying to escape when overcome by smoke inhalation. "It's always tragic when we lose someone so young," said Fire Chief Robert Kowalski. "House fires spread incredibly fast. In cases like this, seconds can mean the difference between life and death." Morrison had lived at the Walnut Lane address for approximately 2 years, according to neighbors. She kept to herself and was rarely seen outside of work hours. "She was very quiet," said Janet Phelps, who lives across the street. "Sometimes I'd see her coming or going, but we never really talked. I wish I'd made more of an effort to be neighborly." I found Janet Phelps's address in the white pages, directly across from 1247. If anyone would remember the fire, it would be her. I waited until Virginia left for work the next morning, then walked across the street and knocked on Mrs. Phelps's door. She was an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, the type who probably knew everyone's business in the neighborhood. "Mrs. Phelps? I'm Gary from across the street. I wondered if I could ask you about something." "Of course, dear. Would you like some coffee?" "That's very kind, but I just have a quick question. Do you remember the house fire at 1247, about 8 years ago?" Her expression changed immediately. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. "The newspaper said you were quoted in the article. About Virginia Morrison? I've never heard that name. But the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think you should go now." She started to close the door. "Please, Mrs. Phelps. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need to understand what happened." She paused, studying my face. "You're the one who lives next door to that place?" "Yes, with a woman. My wife, Virginia." Mrs. Phelps went completely pale. "That's impossible." "What's impossible?" "Your wife. I've seen her through the windows, heard her voice in the yard. But that's impossible, because Virginia Morrison died in that fire 8 years ago. I saw them carry her body out myself." Mrs. Phelps invited me inside, her hands shaking as she poured coffee. Her living room was neat and traditional, with family photos covering every surface and a cross-stitch sampler reading "Bless this house" hanging above the mantel. "Tell me about the fire," I said gently. She sat across from me, wrapping her fingers around her coffee mug like she needed the warmth. "It was March 15th, 2015. I remember because it was my grandson's birthday, and I was on the phone with my daughter when I smelled the smoke." "What did you see?" "Flames coming from the kitchen window. I called 911 immediately, then went outside to see if I could help. But the fire spread so fast, by the time the trucks arrived, the whole first floor was engulfed. She paused, staring into her coffee. They found her in the hallway. The firefighters brought her out, tried CPR right there on the front lawn, but it was too late. I'll never forget it. She was so young. You're sure it was Virginia Morrison? Positive. I'd seen her coming and going for 2 years. Quiet girl, kept to herself but always polite when we happened to cross paths. She worked at the dental office on Germantown Avenue. What did she look like? Mrs. Phelps went to a small desk and returned with a photo album. She flipped through several pages before stopping at a newspaper clipping pasted inside. I kept the obituary, she said. I felt bad that no one came to claim her belongings afterward. Seemed wrong somehow. She showed me the clipping. It was the same article I'd found online, complete with Virginia's photo. But seeing it in person, in Mrs. Phelps' handwriting, alongside other neighborhood news, made it undeniably real. After the fire, what happened to the house? Nothing. The landlord had insurance, but he never bothered to repair it. Said it would cost more than the property was worth. It's been empty ever since. Empty? Well, until you and your wife moved in next door. She looked at me carefully. When was that exactly? I had to think. 7 years ago. We signed the lease in June 2016. So, about a year after the fire. Yes. Mrs. Phelps was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Henderson, Gary Henderson. Mr. Henderson, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. What does your wife look like? I described Virginia. Her auburn hair, her heart-shaped face, her height and build, the small scar above her eyebrow. Mrs. Phelps had gone white again. That's exactly what Virginia Morrison looked like, down to the scar. That's impossible. Is it? She leaned forward. Tell me, does your wife have any family? No. She was orphaned young. Any friends from before you met? I tried to think. Not really. She says she's not good at maintaining long-distance relationships. Any hobbies, interests, stories from her past? Again, I came up empty. Virginia was remarkably present-focused. She never talked about old boyfriends, childhood memories, college experiences, former jobs. When I brought up the past, she'd smile and say something like, "That was then, this is now," or "I prefer to live in the moment." Mr. Henderson, how did you meet your wife? At a coffee shop downtown. She was reading alone. I asked what book she was enjoying. We started talking. When exactly? May 2016. 2 months after Virginia Morrison's funeral. The coffee mug trembled in my hands. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you that the woman living next door to a house where Virginia Morrison died in a fire looks exactly like Virginia Morrison, has the same name as Virginia Morrison, and appeared in your life just 2 months after Virginia Morrison was buried. People have doppelgangers. It's not that uncommon. With the same name? Morrison is a common surname. And Virginia? I didn't have an answer for that. Mrs. Phelps got up and went to her window. Mr. Henderson, come here. I joined her at the window, which had a clear view of both houses. For the past 7 years, I've watched your wife come and go. I've seen her in the yard, heard her laugh, watched her tend the garden. And every single time it gives me the willies, because I know I watched Virginia Morrison die. Maybe you're mistaken about what she looked like. Maybe. She turned to face me. Or maybe you should ask yourself how well you really know your wife. I left Mrs. Phelps's house with my head spinning. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be an explanation. Coincidences happened. People looked alike. Names were repeated. But the rational part was losing the argument. I drove to the dental office on Germantown Avenue and asked to speak with the office manager. Dr. Peterson was a middle-aged man with tired eyes who had been running the practice for 15 years. Virginia Morrison? He frowned. Yes, she worked here. Excellent hygienist. Such a tragedy. Can you tell me about her? Well, there's not much to tell. She was very professional, very quiet. Patients liked her. She had a gentle touch. Did she ever mention family, friends, boyfriends? No, she was quite private. I always got the impression she was a bit lonely, to be honest. Never talked about weekend plans or vacation trips. Just came to work, did her job well, and went home. What happened after she died? We were all shocked, of course. I went to the funeral, but it was very small. Just a few co-workers and neighbors. No family at all, which was heartbreaking. A few things, I kept them for a while in case someone came to claim them, but eventually I had to clean out her locker. There wasn't much. Some personal hygiene items, a change of clothes, a few paperback novels. What happened to them? I donated the books and threw away the rest, but I kept one thing. He went to his office and returned with a small item wrapped in tissue paper. Her coffee mug. She used it every day. It seemed wrong to just throw it away. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a simple white mug with "World's Okayest Dental Hygienist" printed in faded blue letters. I stared at it, my throat tightening. Virginia had the exact same mug at home. She used it every morning for her coffee and always laughed at the joke, saying it was the most accurate self-assessment she'd ever owned. Could I buy this from you? Dr. Peterson looked surprised. Are you related to Virginia somehow? In a way. He studied my face, then handed me the mug. Take it. I'm glad it's going to someone who cares. I sat in my car outside the dental office, turning the coffee mug over in my hands. The bottom was slightly chipped, exactly like the one Virginia used every morning. But this one had belonged to a woman who'd been dead for 8 years. I needed to see Virginia's mug. I needed to compare them side by side. But when I got home, Virginia was already there, even though she shouldn't have been off work for another 3 hours. You're home early, I said, slipping the dental office mug into my jacket pocket. They were overstaffed today, so I volunteered to leave. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, typing rapidly. What have you been up to? Just running errands. She looked up from her screen. What kind of errands? Boring stuff. Post office, bank. On Germantown Avenue? My heart skipped. What makes you think that? Your car smells like that new coffee shop next to the dentist's office. I can smell it from here. I hadn't been near any coffee shop, but I had been to the dentist's office. How could she possibly know that? I grabbed a latte after the bank, I lied. She went back to typing. What did you think of Dr. Peterson? The world tilted sideways. Who? Dr. Peterson, at the dental office. Didn't you just come from there? I hadn't mentioned the dental office. I hadn't mentioned Dr. Peterson. I'd been careful not to say where I'd been. I don't know what you're talking about. Virginia smiled without looking up from her laptop. Of course you don't. I excused myself to use the bathroom and pulled out my phone, quickly Googling the insurance company where Virginia claimed to work. I called the main number and asked to be transferred to Virginia Henderson in claims processing. I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name, the receptionist said. What about Virginia Morrison? No, sir, no Virginia Morrison either. Can you double check? She's been working there for several years. Sir, I've been here 8 years and I know all our employees. We've never had a Virginia in claims processing. I hung up and leaned against the bathroom wall, trying to think. If Virginia didn't work where she claimed to work, where did she go every day? What did she do for 8 hours while I was at the office? And how did she know I'd been to see Dr. Peterson? When I came back to the kitchen, Virginia was gone. Her laptop was closed, her purse was missing, and there was no note. I checked the garage. Her car was gone too. I went to the cabinet where we kept our coffee mugs and found Virginia's World's Okayest Dental Hygienist cup. I pulled the dental office mug from my pocket and set them side by side. They were identical. Not similar, identical. Same chip on the bottom, same fading on the letters, same small crack near the handle that I'd assumed came from Virginia dropping it in the sink last year. Both mugs had the exact same damage in the exact same places. That was impossible unless they were the same mug. But Virginia Morrison's mug was supposed to be at home with her, and Virginia Morrison was supposed to be dead. My phone rang. Virginia. Hi, honey. I had to run out to handle something for work. I'll be back late tonight. Don't wait up. Where are you? Just some boring insurance stuff. You wouldn't be interested. Try me. Really, it's nothing. Go ahead and eat without me. There's leftover Chinese in the fridge. Virginia, we need to talk. About what? About where you really work. About where you've been going every day. There was a long pause. I think you're getting paranoid, Gary. Maybe you should talk to someone. Maybe I should. Yes, she said, and her voice sounded different. Colder. Maybe you should. She hung up. I spent the evening going through every document in the house that belonged to Virginia. Her driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, insurance papers. Everything checked out. Virginia Morrison Henderson, married to Gary Henderson, residing at 1249 Walnut Lane. But I also found things that didn't make sense. A library card issued just 7 years ago when Virginia claimed she'd lived in Philadelphia her whole life. A gym membership that started in June 2016, the same month we'd met. A AA membership with the same start date. It was as if Virginia Morrison Henderson had sprung into existence in May 2016. I called the Philadelphia Vital Records office and asked about birth certificates for Virginia Morrison, born on the date listed on her ID. I show 3 Virginia Morrisons born on that date, the clerk said. 1 in Camden, 1 in Pittsburgh, and 1 in Germantown. 3? Birth certificates are public records, sir. Sometimes people have similar names and birth dates. Can you tell me about the one from Germantown? That one's marked as deceased. Died in 2015. What about the Camden one? No death certificate on file. And Pittsburgh? Also deceased. Died in 2014. 3 Virginia Morrisons. 2 dead, 1 supposedly alive. Except the alive one was living with me, and the dead one from Germantown looked exactly like her. I didn't sleep that night. Virginia came home after midnight, moving quietly through the house like she was trying not to wake me. I heard her in the bathroom, running water, opening and closing drawers. When she finally slipped into bed, I pretended to be asleep. She lay still for a long time, too still. I could sense her staring at me in the darkness. I know you're awake, she whispered finally. I didn't respond. You went to see Mrs. Phelps today. My eyes snapped open. How do you know that? She called me. She doesn't have your number. Doesn't she? Virginia rolled over to face me, her features barely visible in the darkness. You'd be surprised what people know about me. Who are you? I'm your wife. No, Virginia Morrison died in a fire 8 years ago. I saw the articles. I talked to people who knew her. You saw articles about a different Virginia Morrison. Who looked exactly like you? Coincidence. With the same name, same address, same coffee mug, same everything? Virginia sat up in bed. You took something from the dental office. It wasn't a question. How do you know that? Give it back. It's just a coffee mug. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to you either. It belonged to Virginia Morrison, who died 8 years ago. Virginia was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, a sound completely different from her usual warm laugh. This one was sharp and cold. You want to know who I am? Yes. You want to know the truth? Yes. She got up and turned on the bedroom light. I blinked against the sudden brightness, and when my eyes adjusted, Virginia was standing at the foot of the bed holding the wooden box from her closet. The truth is that you're not very good at paying attention, she said, dumping the contents of the box onto the bed. The newspaper clippings scattered across the comforter. You've been living with me for 7 years and you never once asked the right questions. I sat up, staring at the obituaries. What are these? My work. Your work? Every woman in those clippings died alone. No family, no close friends, no one who would be missed for very long. Virginia picked up one of the articles. Ginger Williams, Austin, Texas. Worked at a call center, lived in a studio apartment, spent her evenings watching Netflix and eating microwave dinners. No one to remember her quirks or her mannerisms or the way she laughed. She picked up another clipping. Veronica Stone, Cleveland, Ohio. Night shift nurse, lived with 3 cats, hadn't spoken to another human being outside of work in 6 months. Perfect candidate. Candidate for what? For replacement. The room seemed to tilt around me. Replacement? It's easier than you might think. Find a lonely woman with no connections, study her for a few weeks, learn her habits and preferences, then arrange for an accident. House fires are particularly effective because they destroy evidence. I couldn't breathe. You killed these women? I became these women. There's a difference. You murdered them and stole their identities. I improved their lives. Do you think Virginia Morrison was happy, living alone above a dental office, eating frozen dinners every night? Do you think Ginger Williams was fulfilled working at a call center and going home to an empty apartment? So you decided they'd be better off dead? I decided they'd be better off as me, and I was right. Look at the life Virginia Morrison has now. A husband who loves her, a beautiful home, a purpose. You're insane. Virginia smiled. I'm practical. Do you know how hard it is to maintain a consistent identity for decades? How exhausting it is to remember every lie, every fabricated detail of a fake childhood? It's much easier to become someone who already existed. But they still existed, you just killed them. They existed alone. I exist with you. Which life has more value? I scrambled out of bed, backing toward the door. I'm calling the police. With what evidence? That I look like some women who died in accidents? That I have the same name as one of them? Coincidences aren't crimes, Gary. She was right. I had suspicions, but no proof, no evidence that would convince anyone else. Besides, Virginia continued, what exactly would you tell them? That your wife of 7 years is actually a serial killer who steals identities? That you lived with her all this time without noticing? What does that say about you? It says I trusted you. It says you never really looked at me, never really knew me. You were happy to live with a stranger as long as she cooked your meals and shared your bed. That stung because it was partially true. I'd been content with surface-level intimacy, never pushing when Virginia deflected questions about her past. How many? I asked. How many what? How many women have you killed? Virginia considered the question. Define killed. How many people are dead because of you? Directly? 12? Indirectly? Hard to say. Some of them probably would have committed suicide eventually anyway. I just expedited the process. 12 people, 12 empty lives, 12 women who had nothing to lose and no one to miss them. What about Virginia Morrison, the real one? She was the loneliest of all, 34 years old, never married, no friends, no hobbies besides reading romance novels about lives she'd never have. I did her a favor. You burned her alive. I gave her love. She died as someone who was cherished, even if she didn't know it at the time. The casual way she talked about murder made my stomach turn. And before her? Before you became Virginia Morrison? I was someone else. And before that, someone else. I've been many women, Gary, but I've been your wife the longest. What's your real name? Virginia smiled. I don't remember. I spent 3 days at a motel trying to figure out what to do. I'd taken some clothes and my laptop, telling Virginia I needed space to think. She didn't try to stop me. Take all the time you need, she'd said pleasantly. I'll be here when you're ready to come home. I researched every death in her collection of obituaries, looking for patterns or evidence. All the women had died in house fires. All were described as loners with no close relationships. All had life insurance policies that would have paid out to whoever managed to claim them. But Virginia wasn't claiming insurance money. She was claiming their lives. I called Detective Rosa Martinez with the Philadelphia Police Department and asked to meet. She was a middle-aged woman with intelligent eyes and the weariness of someone who'd seen too much. Mr. Henderson, you said on the phone this was about a serial killer? My wife. I think she's been murdering women and taking their identities. Detective Martinez pulled out a notepad. Tell me everything. I laid out the evidence, the obituaries, the timeline, the physical similarities, the coffee mug. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Mr. Henderson, do you have any direct evidence that your wife committed these crimes? She confessed to me. Do you have a recording of this confession? No. Any witnesses? No. Physical evidence linking her to any of these deaths? The coffee mug, which proves what exactly? That she has the same mug as someone who died? That's not evidence of murder. Detective Martinez leaned back in her chair. I understand this must be very distressing for you. Discovering that your spouse isn't who you thought they were is traumatic. But what you're describing sounds more like paranoid delusion than criminal activity. I'm not delusional. A woman who's been murdering people for over a decade, stealing their identities, and somehow managing to completely fool not just you, but the entire system? Social Security, DMV, employers, neighbors? That would require an incredibly sophisticated operation. Maybe she's not working alone. Mr. Henderson, I've investigated actual serial killers. They're usually disorganized, impulsive, sloppy. What you're describing is more like a spy novel than real life. So you won't investigate? I'll make some calls, check the records, but I have to be honest, this sounds like a domestic situation, not a criminal one. Maybe you should consider marriage counseling. I left the police station feeling defeated. Detective Martinez was right about one thing. Virginia's operation was incredibly sophisticated, too sophisticated for someone working alone. But if she wasn't working alone, who was helping her? I drove back to Walnut Lane and parked across the street from our house. Virginia's car was in the driveway, but I also saw an unfamiliar van parked at the curb. Two men in work clothes were carrying boxes out of the house next door. 1247, the burned house. I got out of my car and approached them. Excuse me, what are you doing? The older man, heavy-set with graying hair, looked up from the box he was loading. Cleaning out the place for the landlord. Should have been done years ago. What's in the boxes? Personal effects. Amazing what survives a fire if it's stored in the right places. Found a bunch of stuff in the basement that barely got touched. Personal effects from Virginia Morrison? That's what the landlord said. You know her? In a way. What happens to the stuff now? Gets donated or thrown away depending on condition. Most of it's junk, but there are some photo albums, jewelry, things like that. Could I look through it? The man shrugged. He gave me the landlord's number. I called immediately and explained that I was researching local history and would be interested in preserving Virginia Morrison's belongings. Take whatever you want, the landlord said. I just want it gone. That house has been nothing but a headache. The workers let me sort through the boxes before they loaded them into the van. Most of it was damaged by smoke and water, but some items had been protected in a metal filing cabinet in the basement. I found Virginia Morrison's real life in those boxes. Photo albums showing a shy woman with few friends but genuine smiles. Birthday cards from co-workers who remembered her each year. A diary with entries about her loneliness but also her hopes for the future. A letter she'd started writing to a pen pal service, looking for someone to correspond with. This was the real Virginia Morrison, not the empty shell my wife had described, but a complete person with feelings and dreams and the capacity for happiness. My wife hadn't rescued her from a meaningless existence. She'd murdered someone who was actively trying to build a better life. At the bottom of the last box, I found something that changed everything. A letter addressed to Virginia Morrison from a private investigator in Cleveland, dated 2 weeks before her death. Ms. Morrison, per your request, I've completed my investigation into the death of Veronica Stone. While the official cause was listed as accidental house fire, I've uncovered several inconsistencies that suggest foul play may have been involved. The insurance investigator noted several anomalies at the scene, including evidence that the fire may have been deliberately set. Additionally, a woman matching your description was seen in Ms. Stone's neighborhood several times in the weeks preceding her death. I recommend contacting the Cleveland Police Department with this information. Detective Williams has agreed to reopen the case if presented with new evidence. I'll call you next week to discuss next steps. Sincerely, Robert Chen. Private investigator Virginia Morrison hadn't been a random victim. She'd been investigating my wife, and my wife had killed her to stop the investigation. I drove straight back to the motel and called the number listed on the private investigator's letterhead. A woman answered. Chen Investigations. Is Robert Chen available? Mr. Chen passed away 3 years ago. This is his daughter, Lisa. Can I help you? I'm calling about a case your father worked on in 2015, Virginia Morrison in Philadelphia. There was a pause. Are you from the police? No, I'm related to the case. Can you tell me what your father found? I'd have to check his files. Can you call back tomorrow? This is urgent, please. Another pause. Hold on. I waited, my heart pounding. After several minutes, Lisa Chen came back on the line. I found the file. This is strange. Someone called asking about this same case just 2 weeks ago. Who? A woman. She said she was Virginia Morrison's sister. Virginia Morrison didn't have a sister. That's what I told her, but she was very insistent. She wanted to know what evidence we had about the Cleveland case. What did you tell her? Nothing. Something felt wrong about the call, but she was very persuasive. She knew details about the case that only someone involved would know. What kind of details? She knew about the insurance investigator's report. She knew about the witness who saw someone matching her description. She even knew that Ms. Morrison had hired my father specifically because she thought someone was stalking her. Stalking her? Yes. Ms. Morrison believed someone had been following her, watching her routine, maybe even breaking into her house. She hired my father to investigate, and he connected her case to similar deaths in other cities. How many other cities? At least 6. All house fires, all women living alone, all with suspicious circumstances that were never properly investigated. My wife hadn't just killed 12 women. She'd killed at least 18, probably more. Did your father contact the police? He tried, but without concrete evidence, they weren't interested. That's why he was working directly with Ms. Morrison to build a stronger case. What happened to his evidence? That's the strange part. After he died, someone broke into our office and stole all his files on this case. Nothing else was taken. 3 years ago? Yes. Right around the time my father had his heart attack. Lisa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully. Was your father's heart attack natural? A long silence. Why would you ask that? Because I think the woman your father was investigating killed him too. That's impossible. My father was in good health. The heart attack came out of nowhere. Did he have any contact with her before he died? I don't know. Let me check his appointment book. I waited again, staring out the motel window at the traffic on Germantown Avenue. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, according to his calendar, my father met with a V. Morrison the day before he died. She wasn't Virginia Morrison. She was the person who killed Virginia Morrison. And now she's your wife. Yes. Mr. Henderson, you need to get out of Philadelphia right now. What? If she killed my father to protect her secret, what do you think she'll do to you? I hung up and immediately called Detective Martinez. Detective, it's Gary Henderson. I have new evidence about my wife. Mr. Henderson, I told you. She killed a private investigator in Cleveland 3 years ago, Robert Chen. He was investigating her and she killed him to cover it up. That's a very serious accusation. I have his daughter's contact information. She can verify everything. Detective Martinez sighed. All right, come in tomorrow morning and we'll go through everything again. Tomorrow might be too late. Mr. Henderson, you're not in any immediate danger. If your wife wanted to hurt you, she's had 7 years to do it. But Detective Martinez was wrong. My wife had kept me alive because I was useful to her. I provided cover, respectability, a reason for Virginia Morrison to exist. Now that I knew the truth, I was a liability. I checked out of the motel and drove to my brother's house in New Jersey. Tony lived alone since his divorce and had always told me I could crash there any time. But when I pulled into his driveway, Virginia's car was already there. I sat in my car for a long moment, trying to think. Then I called Tony's landline from my cell phone. "Hey, Gary," Tony answered. "Your wife is here. She said you two had a fight and she wanted to apologize. She's making dinner." Tony listened to me carefully. "Get out of the house right now." "What? Why?" "Just trust me. Make up an excuse and leave. Go to a neighbor's house and call the police." "Gary, what's going on?" "Virginia seems really worried about you. She says you've been acting paranoid, maybe having some kind of breakdown. She's dangerous, Tony. Please just..." The line went dead. I tried calling back. No answer. I drove to the nearest police station and ran inside. "I need help. My wife is at my brother's house and I think she's going to kill him." The desk sergeant looked up wearily. "Sir, slow down. What's the situation?" I tried to explain quickly, but it sounded crazy even to me. "A woman who steals identities by murdering people and has somehow convinced my brother that I'm having a mental breakdown." "Have you been drinking tonight, sir?" "No, please, just send someone to check on my brother. Tony Henderson, 423 Maple Street. We can do a wellness check, but you need to understand that domestic disputes..." "This isn't a domestic dispute, this is a serial killer." The sergeant studied my face, then picked up his radio. "Unit 47, respond to 423 Maple Street for a wellness check." 20 minutes later, the radio crackled back. "Unit 47 to dispatch. Wellness check completed. Resident is fine, having dinner with his sister-in-law. No problems reported." I stared at the radio. "Sister-in-law? That's you, right?" the sergeant asked. "Your wife is your brother's sister-in-law." But that wasn't what the officer had said. He'd said Tony was having dinner with his sister-in-law, not his brother's wife. Which meant Virginia had introduced herself as Tony's sister, which meant she was already building a new identity. I drove back to Tony's house and parked down the street, hidden behind a van. Through the kitchen window, I could see Virginia and Tony eating dinner, talking and laughing like old friends. My phone buzzed. A text from Virginia. "Found you. Come inside. Time to talk." I looked back at the window. Virginia was looking directly at me, smiling and waving like she was greeting an old friend. My phone buzzed again. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I started the car and drove away as fast as I could. Behind me, the house on Maple Street began to glow with orange light. 3 days later, I read about the house fire in the New Jersey papers. 2 victims, Tony Henderson, 41, and his sister Virginia Henderson, 38. Apparently, she'd been staying with him after a marital separation. The fire started in the kitchen, probably from cooking oil left unattended. Both were overcome by smoke before they could escape. The obituary listed Virginia as survived by her husband Gary, who was too distraught to comment. I'm writing this from a hotel room in Ohio, trying to figure out what to do next. I know Virginia is still out there somewhere, probably already becoming someone new. Some other lonely woman is about to die so that Virginia can continue her perfect life. I've sent copies of everything I've found to Detective Martinez, to Lisa Chen, to the FBI. Maybe someone will believe me, maybe someone will stop her, or maybe she'll find me first. I keep checking the local obituaries, looking for house fires, looking for women who died alone, because I know she's hunting again, and I'm probably next. Update. Found in Gary Henderson's hotel room after his death in an apparent gas leak explosion. She found me. I should have known she would. Virginia always was good at finding people. Last night I got a call from the front desk. They said my wife had come to bring me some clothes and personal items. She was waiting for me in room 237. Room 237 was right next to mine. I packed quickly and tried to leave through the back exit, but she was waiting in the parking lot, just standing there in the shadows, smiling. "Hello, Gary," she said. "I missed you." I ran back inside and barricaded myself in my room. But I can smell gas now. She's done something to the heating system. If someone finds this, her real name isn't Virginia. I don't think it ever was. I don't know what her real name is, but she's been Virginia Morrison Henderson for 7 years. And before that, she was at least 11 other women. She's probably already picked out her next identity. Some lonely woman in some other city who thinks her life is about to get better. Don't trust anyone who seems too perfect. Don't trust anyone who doesn't have a past. And if you find a woman who matches your ideal partner exactly, who shares all your interests and laughs at all your jokes and never disagrees with anything you say, run. Because she's not falling in love with you, she's studying you, and when she's learned everything she needs to know, she'll find someone lonely enough to die for the life you've built together. The gas smell is getting stronger. I can hear her in the hallway now, humming that tune she always hummed while cooking. I wonder who she'll become next. I wonder if that woman knows she's already dead. Final police report excerpt. Gary Henderson, 35, died in an apparent gas explosion at the Comfort Inn on Route 80. His wife, Virginia Henderson, was questioned but released after providing an alibi. She has since relocated to Denver, Colorado, where she works as a claims adjuster for Mountain States Insurance. The case remains closed. Spend most of my free time hiking through untamed wilderness, just me and the raw beauty of nature. There's something profoundly satisfying about being completely alone with the natural world, undisturbed, pure, authentic. When my wife Helen had to relocate for her new position at the regional medical center, she convinced me that our move would be perfect. A small cottage nestled on the outskirts of town, with direct access to thousands of acres of pristine forest, just waiting to be explored. We never wanted children. Both of us were content with our 3 cats, Midnight, Whiskers, and Patches. They were our family, our responsibility, our joy. Moving with pets had always been a challenge, and I'm embarrassed to admit we'd left a trail of confused new homeowners across the country, each inheriting cats who simply refused to adapt to change. After nearly 4 weeks of unpacking and settling into our new place, I finally felt ready to tackle the wilderness that had been calling to me since we arrived. The morning of September 15, 2023, I woke before dawn with an excitement I hadn't felt in months. Helen could see the anticipation radiating from me as I puttered around the kitchen, checking and rechecking my hiking gear. She watched with amusement as I organized my backpack for the 3rd time, testing the weight distribution and ensuring every essential item was accounted for. "Water?" she asked, running through our usual pre-hike checklist. 2 full bottles plus purification tablets, I confirmed. "Food?" "Energy bars, trail mix, and a sandwich for lunch." "First aid kit?" "Bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers, emergency whistle. Everything's there." She nodded toward the locked cabinet in our bedroom. "What about protection?" I patted the holster on my left hip. The weight of the .38 revolver felt reassuring against my side. Helen had never been comfortable with firearms, and I understood her concerns completely. But hiking alone in unfamiliar territory demanded certain precautions: wild animals, dangerous terrain, potential encounters with unsavory individuals. The wilderness held beauty and peril in equal measure. "Weather forecast still looking good?" she asked, wrapping her arms around my waist from behind. "Clear skies, mild temperatures, light winds, perfect conditions." I turned in her embrace and smiled. "Don't worry, Helen. This isn't my first adventure into the unknown." It was a small tradition between us, that reassuring phrase. Helen had never shared my passion for hiking. She despised sweating, couldn't tolerate insects, and found extended walking tedious. I considered myself fortunate that my primary vice involved fresh air and exercise rather than alcohol, gambling, or expensive hobbies. Deep down, I suspected she hoped I'd eventually find a hiking companion in our new town, someone to share these expeditions so she wouldn't feel obligated to join me. After kissing Helen goodbye as she prepared for another demanding day at the medical center, I loaded my gear into our sedan and began the 40-minute drive to Cascade Ridge National Forest. The journey took me through winding country roads, past farmhouses and rolling hills that gradually gave way to dense woodland. As I climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew cooler and crisper, carrying the rich scent of pine and earth. The parking area at the trailhead was nearly deserted when I arrived just after 8 a.m. A young family was setting up a picnic at one of the wooden tables near the restrooms, their 2 small children racing around the playground equipment with boundless energy. An elderly couple sat on a bench, sharing coffee from a thermos and pointing toward different mountain peaks visible in the distance. I methodically checked my gear one final time, adjusting straps and testing buckles. The visitor center sat adjacent to the parking area, a rustic log structure that blended seamlessly with the forest surroundings. A park ranger emerged from the building as I shouldered my pack, raising his hand in a friendly wave. "Beautiful morning for a hike," he called out, his weathered face creasing into a genuine smile. "Couldn't ask for better conditions," I agreed, approaching the information board mounted near the visitor center entrance. The display showed detailed trail maps with routes color-coded by difficulty level. Each trail listing included estimated hiking times, elevation changes, terrain descriptions, and notes about local wildlife. I photographed the entire board with my phone, zooming in to capture crucial details clearly. The ranger approached with a printed trail map, which I accepted gratefully. "First time visiting Cascade Ridge?" he inquired. "Just moved to the area. I've been eager to explore these mountains since we arrived." "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said warmly. "Sounds like you have some hiking experience." "I've been doing this for about 8 years now. Started with day hikes and gradually worked up to multi-day backcountry trips." "Good to hear. Just remember to stick to the marked trails. We've had a few incidents this season with folks wandering off path and getting themselves turned around. The terrain can be deceptive, especially for newcomers." "Absolutely. I'll stay on the designated routes." "Have a safe hike," he said as I headed toward the trailhead. I selected the most challenging available route, the Ridgeline Trail, marked in black on the difficulty chart. The description promised steep ascents, rocky terrain, and spectacular panoramic views from the summit. The estimated round-trip time was 7 hours, which suited my plans perfectly. The trail would take me to an elevation of nearly 4,800 feet, offering breathtaking vistas of the valley and surrounding mountain ranges. The initial portion of the Ridgeline Trail wound gently through old-growth forest, following a well-maintained path marked with distinctive blue blazes painted on tree trunks every 50 yards. Towering pines and firs created a natural cathedral above me, their branches filtering the morning sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. The forest floor was carpeted with decades of fallen needles, creating a soft, springy surface that absorbed the sound of my footsteps. For the first hour, I encountered several other hikers, a group of college students heading out for a weekend camping trip, an older gentleman with professional photography equipment, and a woman walking her energetic border collie. We exchanged friendly greetings and brief conversations about trail conditions and weather expectations. The social interactions felt reassuring, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this vast wilderness. As I climbed higher and the trail grew steeper, the encounters with other people became less frequent. The well-groomed path gradually gave way to rougher terrain, with exposed roots and loose rocks requiring more careful foot placement. My breathing deepened as the elevation gain demanded greater effort, but I maintained a steady, sustainable pace. 3 hours into the hike, I reached the first major waypoint, a small clearing with several designated camping sites, each marked with a metal fire ring and a wooden picnic table. A basic vault toilet had been constructed at the edge of the clearing, and a hand-pumped well provided access to groundwater. The entire area was deserted, which wasn't entirely surprising for a weekday in late September. I took advantage of the facilities, refilled my water bottles, and consumed half of my sandwich while studying the trail map. According to my calculations, I was making excellent time. The most challenging section, a steep, switchbacking climb to the ridgeline, lay ahead. From there, it would be a relatively easy traverse to the summit overlook. The surrounding forest was alive with natural sounds. Birds called from the canopy overhead, their songs echoing through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered rhythmically against dead timber. Occasionally, I heard rustling in the underbrush as small animals moved through their territory, probably squirrels or chipmunks gathering food for the approaching winter. After a 20-minute rest, I shouldered my pack and continued upward. The trail became increasingly challenging, requiring the use of my hands for balance as I scrambled over rocky outcroppings and navigated around fallen trees. My heart rate elevated, and sweat began to soak through my hiking shirt despite the cool mountain air. Another hour of steady climbing brought me to a dramatic viewpoint where the forest opened up, revealing the valley spread out far below. I could make out the town where Helen was working, the geometric patterns of agricultural fields, and the ribbon of highway that had brought me to the mountains. I paused to capture several photographs, including a selfie that I immediately sent to Helen with the message, "Reached the viewpoint. The climb was worth every step." My phone showed full signal strength, and Helen's response came through within minutes. "Gorgeous view. Be careful up there. Love you." I typed back quickly, "Always careful. See you tonight for dinner." As I continued toward the summit, the trail became less distinct. The blue blazes appeared less frequently, sometimes separated by distances that required careful searching to locate the next marker. The forest grew denser, with thick underbrush crowding close to the narrow path. Several times I had to push through tangles of thorny shrubs that caught at my clothing and scratched exposed skin. The wildlife sounds that had provided constant background noise throughout the morning gradually faded away. The absence of birdsong struck me as unusual, creating an unnatural silence that made every sound I generated, footsteps, breathing, the rustle of my clothing, seem unnaturally loud and intrusive. During a moment of uncertainty about the trail direction, I noticed what appeared to be a shortcut, a narrow gap between two massive boulders that seemed to lead in the general direction I needed to travel. The official trail curved away to the left, adding what looked like an unnecessary detour around a steep hillside. Against my better judgment and the park ranger's explicit instructions to stay on marked paths, I decided to investigate the apparent shortcut. The gap between the boulders was just wide enough for me to squeeze through sideways, my backpack scraping against the rough granite surfaces. On the other side, I found myself in a small natural corridor formed by towering rock walls. The passage extended for perhaps 30 yards before opening into what appeared to be another section of forest. "Just a quick look," I told myself. "If it doesn't connect back to the main trail within a few minutes, I'll return to the marked path." The corridor led into a grove of trees unlike any I had encountered during the morning's hike. These were older, larger specimens with trunks so massive that 3 people holding hands couldn't encircle them. Their canopy was so dense that very little sunlight penetrated to ground level, creating an environment of perpetual twilight, even though it was barely past noon. The temperature seemed to drop noticeably as I moved deeper into the grove. The air felt thick and humid, almost tropical, which made no sense given the mountain elevation and season. More disturbing was the complete absence of sound. No birds, no insects, no wind moving through the branches overhead. The silence was so profound that it felt oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I checked my compass, a reliable backup navigation tool I always carried. The needle spun erratically, unable to find magnetic north. I tapped the instrument and tried again with the same result. Electronic devices could malfunction, but a simple magnetic compass shouldn't be affected by anything in a normal forest environment. Growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, I turned to retrace my steps back to the boulder passage. To my alarm, the narrow corridor I had just walked through was no longer visible. The grove appeared to extend in all directions, with no obvious exit point. Dense underbrush blocked most sight lines beyond a few dozen yards. Fighting down a surge of panic, I methodically began working my way around the perimeter of the grove, searching for the gap between the boulders. Every direction looked identical. Towering trees, thick underbrush, and that unnatural twilight atmosphere. After 20 minutes of careful searching, I was forced to accept that I had somehow become disoriented in a way that defied logical explanation. I retrieved my phone to call for help, but the device showed no signal bars. More troubling, the GPS function couldn't acquire a satellite lock despite the fact that I was outdoors with a clear view of the sky through gaps in the canopy. The phone's compass app spun just as uselessly as my magnetic compass. Forcing myself to remain calm, I reviewed my options. The grove couldn't be infinitely large. If I picked a direction and walked in a straight line, I would eventually reach its edge and hopefully regain my bearings. I used my knife to mark trees as I passed them, carving small arrows to indicate my direction of travel and prevent walking in circles. For what felt like hours, I pushed through the dense forest, marking trees and maintaining what I believed to be a straight course. The light never changed, remaining at that dim twilight level regardless of what the actual time might be. My watch showed different times each time I checked it, first 2:30 p.m., then 11:15 a.m., then 6:45 p.m. The digital display seemed to be malfunctioning as badly as my other navigation equipment. Exhaustion was beginning to affect my judgment. My water supply was half depleted, and I had consumed most of my food during the extended hiking. More concerning was the psychological impact of being lost in such an abnormal environment. The persistent silence was wearing on my nerves, making me jump at every small sound I created. As afternoon wore on, or what I assumed was afternoon based on my deteriorating sense of time, I began to notice changes in my surroundings that couldn't be explained by fatigue or stress. Trees that I was certain I had marked with my knife appeared unmarked when I encountered them again. Paths that had been blocked by fallen logs or dense brush seemed to open up when I approached from different directions. Just as true desperation was beginning to set in, I stumbled into a large clearing that contained a sight both welcome and deeply unsettling. A log cabin surrounded by a tall chain-link fence, topped with coils of razor wire. The structure appeared to be well maintained, with smoke rising from a stone chimney and warm light glowing through curtained windows. A generator hummed quietly somewhere behind the building, explaining the electric lights I could see. The fencing formed a perfect square approximately 100 yards on each side, with the cabin positioned in the center of the enclosed area. At each corner of the fence perimeter stood tall posts supporting powerful floodlights, currently switched off but obviously designed to illuminate the entire compound after dark. Multiple warning signs were attached to the fence at regular intervals. I approached close enough to read the signs. Most were official-looking metal placards: "No trespassing, private property, authorized personnel only," and "Warning, electrified fence." But scattered among these official warnings were handmade signs that were far more disturbing. Pieces of cardboard and cloth bore messages scrawled in what looked like brown paint or dried blood. "Turn back now, they don't want you here," and most ominously, simply, "Don't." The temperature had been dropping steadily since I entered the strange grove, and now I was genuinely cold. My breath was beginning to form visible clouds in the increasingly frigid air, despite the fact that it had been a warm September morning when I started hiking. Looking up at the sky through the clearing, I could see heavy gray clouds gathering overhead, and the first few snowflakes were beginning to fall. Snow in September at this elevation wasn't impossible, but the rapid weather change was extremely unusual. I had checked the extended forecast carefully before leaving home, and no precipitation had been predicted for at least a week. Yet here I was, watching snowfall steadily increase in intensity. My phone still showed no signal, but I could see that I had several unread messages from Helen. The timestamps made no sense. Some appeared to be from hours in the future, others from dates that hadn't occurred yet. One message from Helen was particularly confusing. "Where are you? You were supposed to be home 2 hours ago. I'm starting to worry." According to my planned schedule, I shouldn't even be starting my descent for another 2 hours. Either my watch was malfunctioning badly, or something very strange was happening with time itself in this place. The snowfall was becoming heavy enough to create a genuine survival situation. My hiking clothes were suitable for cool weather, but not for a snowstorm. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and I could feel the early stages of hypothermia beginning to affect my thinking and coordination. Despite the ominous warning signs, the cabin represented the only available shelter in a potentially life-threatening situation. I had to make a choice between following the posted warnings and risking death from exposure. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. I found what appeared to be the main gate in the fence, a heavy metal door secured with multiple locks and deadbolts. To my surprise, the gate was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently passed through without properly securing it behind them. The gap was just wide enough for me to squeeze through sideways. The moment I stepped inside the fenced perimeter, several things became immediately apparent. First, the snow wasn't accumulating within the compound as heavily as it was outside the fence. Second, the air was noticeably warmer, creating an artificial microclimate around the cabin. Third, and most disturbing, I could see fresh footprints in the light snow. Human footprints that led from the gate directly to the cabin's front door. Someone else was here, or had been here very recently. The cabin's front door stood slightly open, revealing a warm, inviting interior, lit by kerosene lamps and the glow from a stone fireplace. The sound of wood crackling in the fire was clearly audible, and I could smell the distinctive scent of burning pine. After hours in the cold, silent forest, these normal domestic sounds and smells were incredibly appealing. "Hello?" I called out, loudly enough to be heard inside the cabin. "Is anyone there? I'm a hiker who got lost in the storm. I need shelter." No response came from within the building. I called out again, explaining my situation in more detail, but received only silence in return. The footprints I had observed led directly to the front door, but there were no corresponding tracks leading away from the cabin. Whoever had made those prints was presumably still inside. The snowstorm was intensifying rapidly, and the temperature continued to plummet. Ice crystals were beginning to form on my eyelashes and facial hair. My fingers were becoming numb despite my insulated gloves, and I could feel the early warning signs of frostbite in my toes. Staying outside much longer would result in serious cold weather injuries or death. I approached the cabin cautiously, my right hand resting on the grip of my holstered revolver. The weapon felt awkward in that position. I was left-handed and normally carried it on my left hip for a natural cross-draw. Somehow, I had apparently moved it to my right side without remembering doing so, probably during one of my many gear adjustments while lost in the forest. "I'm coming in," I announced loudly. "I don't mean any harm. I just need to get out of this weather." I pushed the door open slowly and stepped across the threshold into warmth and light. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious and well-appointed. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a robust fire burning brightly. Comfortable furniture was arranged around the room: a leather couch, several wooden chairs, and a dining table set for 2 people. Kerosene lamps provided adequate lighting, and I could hear the steady hum of a generator somewhere outside. What immediately struck me as odd was how pristine everything appeared. The dining table was set with clean plates, glasses, and silverware, as if someone was expecting guests for dinner. 2 coffee cups sat on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, still steaming as if they had just been filled. A kettle whistled softly on a wood-burning stove in the corner. Yet there was absolutely no sign of human occupancy. No coats hanging by the door, no personal items visible anywhere, no indication that anyone actually lived in this place. It felt more like a movie set or a museum display than a real home. I called out again, more insistently this time. "I know someone is here. I saw your footprints in the snow. I'm not looking for trouble. I just need shelter until this storm passes." The only response was the continued crackling of the fire and the soft whistle of the kettle. I moved further into the room, examining my surroundings more carefully. The cabin was constructed of solid log walls with thick wooden beams supporting the ceiling. Heavy curtains covered the windows, blocking any view of the outside. A hallway led toward what appeared to be a bedroom and bathroom in the back of the structure. On the dining table, partially hidden under some papers, I noticed a large-scale topographic map of the local area. Red X marks had been drawn at various locations throughout the forest, connected by lines in what appeared to be some kind of pattern or route. My hiking trail was clearly marked, along with several other popular routes used by recreational hikers. More disturbing were the notes written in the margins of the map. In neat handwriting, someone had documented dates, times, and what appeared to be descriptions of hikers. Male, 30s, red backpack, hiking alone, 9/12. Female, blonde hair, with dog, 9/8. And dozens of similar entries going back several months. At the bottom of the map, in different handwriting that looked more hurried and desperate, someone had written, "They watch from the trees. Stay inside after dark. Don't trust the voices. The fence won't keep them out forever." I spent several minutes studying the map and its disturbing annotations, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The systematic recording of hiker information suggested some kind of surveillance operation. But for what purpose? The panicked notes about watching eyes and voices implied something far more sinister than simple observation. My examination of the evidence was interrupted by a sound from outside, a low rhythmic thumping, like someone striking the side of a building with a heavy object. The sound came from the rear of the cabin, near where I had heard the generator running. I moved to the back window and carefully pulled aside the curtain to peer outside. The view through the window revealed the back portion of the fenced compound. In the failing light and swirling snow, I could make out several dark shapes moving along the fence line. At first, I assumed they were deer or other wildlife seeking shelter from the storm. But as I watched more carefully, their movement patterns were wrong for animals. They moved in perfect coordination, maintaining equal spacing between each figure, and their shapes were too upright, too human-like. The thumping sound continued, steady and deliberate. It wasn't random banging. It had the rhythm of a signal, like someone tapping out a code. As I watched, one of the figures near the fence raised what appeared to be a long stick or pole and struck the chain-link barrier. The metallic clang carried clearly through the storm, and I realized I had found the source of the rhythmic thumping. My blood pressure spiked as the implications of what I was seeing began to register. These weren't lost hikers seeking shelter. The coordinated movement, the deliberate signaling, the patient positioning around the compound, this was organized, purposeful behavior. I was not alone in this remote location, and whoever was outside had me surrounded. I let the curtain fall back into place and quickly moved away from the window. My mind raced through possible explanations and courses of action. The most rational part of my brain insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps researchers conducting some kind of wildlife study, or park rangers investigating reports of illegal activities in the forest. But the evidence didn't support benign explanations. The disturbing map annotations, the abandoned feeling cabin with its too perfect domestic setup, the systematic surveillance of hikers, and now the coordinated presence of multiple figures outside the fence, everything pointed toward something far more threatening. I checked my phone again, hoping the electronic interference that had been blocking signals might have cleared. Still no service, and the device was displaying increasingly erratic behavior. The time jumped between different readings as I watched, and the battery indicator fluctuated wildly despite being fully charged when I left home. The thumping outside ceased abruptly, leaving only the sound of wind and the crackling fire. In the sudden quiet, I became aware of another sound, soft footsteps moving around the exterior of the cabin. Not the heavy boots of hikers or workers, but something lighter, more stealthy. The footsteps circled the building slowly, pausing occasionally as if the walker was examining windows or doors. I drew my revolver and checked the cylinder. 6 rounds loaded, with a speed loader in my pocket containing 6 more. 12 bullets against an unknown number of potential threats. The odds weren't encouraging, but at least I wasn't completely defenseless. The footsteps stopped directly outside the front door. I could hear breathing, slow, deliberate, controlled breathing, like someone trying to remain perfectly quiet. The door handle began to turn with agonizing slowness, the metal mechanism creating barely audible clicks as it rotated. I took position behind the dining table, using it as cover while keeping my weapon trained on the entrance. My hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Years of target practice and hunter safety training had ingrained proper firearm handling into muscle memory. The door opened just a few inches, and I could see a shadow in the gap. "I'm armed," I announced clearly. "If you come through that door uninvited, I will defend myself." The shadow froze for several seconds, then the door slowly closed again. The breathing sound faded as whoever was outside moved away from the entrance. But I could still hear the soft footsteps circling the building, now joined by additional sets of footsteps. More figures had arrived, or others who had been watching silently had begun to move. Over the next hour, as darkness fell completely and the snowstorm continued to rage, the activity outside the cabin intensified dramatically. The soft footsteps had been joined by other sounds, voices whispering in the distance, the occasional metallic clang of someone testing the fence, and what sounded like equipment being moved or positioned around the compound. I had barricaded the front door using the dining table and one of the wooden chairs. The back door leading from the kitchen was secured with a heavy wooden beam that appeared to have been installed specifically for that purpose. All the curtains were drawn tight, preventing anyone outside from seeing in while also blocking my view of their activities. The kerosene lamps provided adequate light for moving around inside the cabin, but I kept them turned down low to avoid creating obvious shadows that might reveal my position to watchers outside. The fire in the fireplace had burned down to glowing coals, and I didn't dare add more wood for fear that the increased light might be visible through gaps in the curtains. My phone had finally stopped working entirely. The screen remained black no matter what buttons I pressed, and the device wouldn't respond to any attempts to restart it. My watch had also ceased functioning, leaving me with no way to track the passage of time except by observing the gradual dimming of the fire. As I explored the cabin more thoroughly, searching for additional weapons or tools that might be useful, I made several disturbing discoveries. In the bedroom, I found a journal hidden beneath the mattress. The entries, written in the same neat handwriting as the map annotations, documented months of observations. Day 47. 3 more hikers today. The watchers are becoming bolder, approaching the fence line during daylight hours. Change the warning signs again, but people keep ignoring them. Day 52. Found evidence of a camp about 2 miles north. Looked like someone had been there for several days before leaving suddenly. All their gear was abandoned, including a backpack with identification. Reported it to authorities, but they didn't seem concerned. Day 58. The pattern is becoming clear. They're drawn to isolated hikers, especially those who wander off the marked trails. The fence provides some protection, but not permanently. I need to find a way to get word to the outside world. Day 63. Last entry. They're testing the fence systematically now, looking for weak points. The generator is running low on fuel, and I won't be able to make another supply run. If someone finds this journal, know that the forest itself has been compromised. Don't trust your equipment, don't trust your senses, and whatever you do, don't go into the trees alone after dark. The journal entries painted a picture of someone who had been living in the cabin for an extended period, studying the same phenomena that had trapped me. The references to watchers and they were ominously vague, but the fear and desperation in the later entries were unmistakable. In the kitchen, I found a radio, an old-fashioned analog unit that didn't rely on digital technology. When I turned it on, static filled the air, but by carefully adjusting the tuner, I was able to pick up fragments of broadcasts. Most were routine communications between park rangers, dispatchers, and emergency services, but one transmission made my heart race. Search and rescue operation initiated for missing hiker. Vehicle located at Cascade Ridge Trailhead. Family reports he failed to return as scheduled. Expanding search to include off-trail areas. They were looking for me. Helen had reported me missing when I failed to come home as planned. But how long had I been gone? The journal's final entry was dated 3 days ago, but that couldn't be right. I had only been hiking for 1 day. The radio crackled with another transmission. Day 3 of search operation. No trace of the missing hiker. Weather conditions hampering search efforts, requesting additional personnel and equipment. Day 3? That was impossible. I had left home this morning, hiked for several hours, become lost in the strange grove, and found the cabin. Even accounting for disorientation and the confusing time displays on my malfunctioning devices, I couldn't have been missing for 3 days. But the evidence was mounting that something was seriously wrong with my perception of time and reality. The journal entries, the radio broadcasts, the systematic surveillance documented in the map annotations. Everything suggested that this location existed outside the normal flow of time and natural law. Throughout the endless night, the sounds outside the cabin continued. Sometimes the activity seemed to intensify, with multiple voices whispering in the darkness and the steady rhythm of footsteps circling the building. Other times, everything fell silent for long periods, creating an oppressive quiet that was somehow more frightening than the obvious presence of watchers. I dozed fitfully in one of the wooden chairs, my revolver across my lap and my senses alert for any change in the situation. Every small sound, the settling of the logs in the fireplace, wind rattling a loose shutter, the distant hum of the generator, brought me instantly to full alertness. As the first gray light of dawn began to filter through gaps in the curtains, the activity outside gradually diminished. The voices fell silent, the footsteps faded away, and an almost normal quiet settled over the compound. I waited another hour before carefully approaching one of the front windows and peering outside. The snow had stopped falling, and the storm clouds were breaking up to reveal patches of blue sky. The compound looked completely normal in the morning light. No footprints in the snow, no evidence of the night's activities, no sign that anyone had been present except for my own tracks leading from the gate to the cabin door. My phone suddenly chirped back to life, the screen illuminating to show dozens of missed calls and text messages from Helen, my family, and numbers I didn't recognize. According to the timestamp, it was 7:30 a.m. on September 19th, 4 days after I had left home for what was supposed to be a single-day hike. The messages told a story of escalating concern and frantic searching. Helen's early messages were routine check-ins, but they quickly escalated to worried inquiries, then desperate pleas for me to call home. The later messages were from search and rescue coordinators, asking for any information about my planned route and current location. I tried calling Helen, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice, familiar and comforting after the terrifying night, brought tears to my eyes. "Helen, it's me," I said after the beep. "I'm okay. I got lost in the storm and found shelter. I'm going to try to make my way back to the trailhead now. I love you." Before leaving the cabin, I took several photographs of the interior, the journal, the map with its disturbing annotations, the radio, and the general layout of the rooms. If I was going to report this incident to authorities, I would need evidence to support what would inevitably sound like an incredible story. The gate in the fence opened easily from the inside, and I stepped out into the crisp morning air. The moment I crossed the threshold of the compound, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if I had passed from one reality into another. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on me throughout the night lifted, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could think clearly. I followed my own tracks back through the snow toward the grove of ancient trees where my ordeal had begun. But as I approached the area where I expected to find the grove, I discovered only normal forest, pine and fir trees of ordinary size, with typical mountain vegetation and clear sight lines in all directions. There was no sign of the massive trees that had trapped me, no evidence of the twilight grove where my compass had failed and my sense of direction had been compromised. The landscape looked exactly as it should have based on the topographic maps I had studied before beginning my hike. Even more confusing, I found myself standing on the marked ridgeline trail, exactly where I should have been according to my original hiking plan. The blue blazes were clearly visible on the surrounding trees, and the trail surface showed the boot prints of other hikers who had passed this way recently. I followed the trail downhill, moving as quickly as my tired legs would carry me. The normal sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling underbrush, wind in the trees, provided a comforting background as I descended toward the trailhead. Everything was exactly as it should be in a normal wilderness environment. 2 hours later, I emerged from the forest to find the parking area bustling with activity. Search and rescue vehicles, park service trucks, and several news vans filled the lot. A command post had been established near the visitor center with maps, communication equipment, and volunteers coordinating search efforts. The moment I appeared at the tree line, still wearing my hiking gear and obviously exhausted but unharmed, a shout went up from the searchers. Within minutes, I was surrounded by paramedics, park rangers, police officers, and reporters, all asking questions and demanding explanations. Helen arrived within an hour, having been notified immediately when I was found. Her relief was overwhelming. She held me tightly while tears streamed down her face, alternately expressing her joy at my safe return and her anger at the worry I had caused. The official debriefing was extensive but ultimately unsatisfying for everyone involved. I told the truth about becoming disoriented in an unusual grove of trees, finding shelter in a cabin during an unexpected snowstorm, and making my way back to the trail when weather conditions improved. But I couldn't explain the 4-day time discrepancy, the electronic equipment malfunctions, or the disturbing evidence I had discovered in the cabin. When search teams were dispatched to locate the cabin based on my description and photographs, they found nothing. The coordinates I provided led to empty forest with no structures, no fence, and no evidence that any buildings had ever existed in that location. My photographs, which had been clear and detailed when I took them, showed only blurry, indistinct images that could have been taken anywhere. The GPS coordinates recorded by my phone placed me at locations that made no geographic sense, sometimes showing me in multiple places simultaneously. The medical examination found me to be in remarkably good condition for someone who had supposedly been lost in the wilderness for 4 days. I showed no signs of dehydration, malnutrition, or exposure injuries. My clothing was clean and undamaged, and I appeared well rested despite claiming to have spent several sleepless nights in survival conditions. Ultimately, the official report classified my disappearance as a case of hiking disorientation, complicated by equipment failure and stress-induced time perception distortion. The investigators concluded that I had likely taken shelter in an existing structure, perhaps a hunting cabin or maintenance building, and that my memories of the events had been distorted by fatigue and psychological stress. But I know what I experienced was real. The journal entries, the systematic surveillance, the watchers in the darkness, all of it happened exactly as I remember. Somewhere in the mountains above our peaceful town, there exists a place where the normal rules of reality don't apply, where time moves differently, and where something ancient and malevolent watches the trails, waiting for isolated hikers to stray from the marked paths. I haven't returned to the forest since that day. Helen and I still live in the same house, but I've taken up different hobbies, gardening, woodworking, activities that keep me close to home and away from the wilderness. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling through the mountains, I think I can hear them calling to me, inviting me back to complete whatever dark purpose they had in mind. The forest still holds its secrets, and I pray that no other hiker will be curious enough to discover what lies hidden in the spaces between the marked trails. Some places are meant to remain unexplored, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. But on quiet evenings when Helen is working late at the medical center, I sometimes find myself standing at our back door, looking up at the dark tree line visible in the distance, wondering who might be up there right now, watching and waiting for the next lost soul to wander off the beaten path and into their carefully constructed web of confusion and terror. The mountains are beautiful during the day, peaceful and inviting, but they transform after dark into something entirely different, something that defies explanation and challenges everything we think we know about the natural world. I survived my encounter with that darkness, but I carry its memory with me every day, a constant reminder that reality is far more fragile and mysterious than most people ever realize. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I really escaped at all, or if I'm still trapped in that cabin, living in a carefully constructed illusion while something inhuman studies my reactions and plans its next move in a game whose rules I'll never understand. The gravel road stretched endlessly ahead of our convoy of 3 weathered camp vans, each one packed with excited children whose voices created a constant hum of anticipation. I gripped the steering wheel of the lead vehicle, watching the dense forest close in around us like walls of an enormous green corridor. 23 years of leading youth camping expeditions had taught me to trust my instincts, and something about this particular site made my stomach clench with unease. Pine Valley Wilderness Camp sprawled across nearly 800 acres of untamed forest, making it the largest site our organization had ever attempted to utilize. The regional coordinator had secured it at a fraction of the usual cost, explaining that the previous operators had abandoned it suddenly the year before. Budget constraints made the offer impossible to refuse, despite my reservations about taking 42 children aged 8 to 14 into completely uncharted territory. As we rounded the final bend, the main clearing came into view. Ancient oak trees formed a natural amphitheater around a flat expanse of grass that had grown wild and uneven. Remnants of old fire pits dotted the area, their blackened stones scattered as if someone had kicked them apart in haste. A series of dilapidated wooden structures stood at the clearing's edge. A storage shed with a partially collapsed roof, an outhouse that leaned precariously to one side, and what appeared to be the foundation of a larger building that had been torn down or burned. "Are we really staying here?" asked Jamie, one of the younger campers, pressing her face against the van window. Her breath fogged the glass as she stared at the deteriorating facilities with obvious disappointment. "It's going to be an adventure," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while privately sharing her concerns. "We'll make it work." The other camp leaders began unloading equipment and directing children to gather their belongings. Patricia, my co-director and longtime friend, approached with a concerned expression. Her usually meticulously organized clipboard hung loosely in her hand, forgotten. "The bathroom facilities are worse than they looked in the photos," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure none of the children could overhear. "The plumbing appears to be completely non-functional, and there's something growing in the water tanks that I prefer not to identify." I nodded grimly. We had backup plans for sanitation emergencies, but implementing them would require significant adjustments to our carefully planned schedule. More troubling was the growing list of safety concerns I was mentally cataloging. The fire pits showed signs of recent use despite the site supposedly being abandoned. Empty beer cans and cigarette butts littered the area around the old storage shed. Most disturbing were the scratch marks I noticed on several tree trunks, deep gouges that looked deliberately carved rather than naturally occurring. "Keep the kids close while we set up," I instructed Patricia. "I want to do a thorough perimeter check before dark." The afternoon passed in a blur of tent assembly and safety briefings. Our standard protocol required mapping all potential hazards within a quarter-mile radius of the main camp, marking dangerous areas with reflective tape, and establishing clear boundaries for unsupervised exploration. The sheer size of this site made that process impossible to complete before nightfall. As the sun began its descent behind the tree line, casting long shadows across our makeshift camp, I gathered the children around the central fire pit we had managed to repair. Their faces glowed in the flickering light, animated with excitement about the evening's planned activities. I found myself studying the darkness beyond our circle of illumination, straining to distinguish between natural forest sounds and anything that might indicate unwelcome visitors. "Tomorrow we'll start our nature identification project," I announced, distributing field guides and magnifying glasses. "But tonight, we have a special tradition to continue." The children erupted in cheers and speculation about the mysterious night game that had become legendary among our regular campers. Previous years had featured elaborate scavenger hunts, ghost stories, and mock survival challenges. This year, however, I felt reluctant to send anyone beyond the immediate vicinity of our fire. As the evening progressed, I noticed several disturbing details that heightened my anxiety. The forest around us maintained an unnatural silence, devoid of the typical nocturnal sounds one would expect in such a dense woodland environment. No owl calls echoed through the trees, no small animals rustled through the underbrush, no insects created their usual nighttime chorus. The absence of these familiar sounds created an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press down on our small circle of light. More concerning were the brief glimpses of movement I caught at the edge of my peripheral vision. Each time I turned to investigate, the darkness revealed nothing unusual, but the sensation of being observed persisted throughout the evening. Patricia noticed my distraction and quietly moved closer during the storytelling portion of our program. "Everything all right?" she whispered, following my gaze toward the tree line. "Probably just adjusting to a new environment," I replied, though my tone conveyed little conviction. "Let's keep a close watch tonight." The children eventually settled into their tents, their excited whispers gradually fading to peaceful silence. The other leaders and I maintained our vigil around the dying fire, taking turns patrolling the camp perimeter and checking on our sleeping charges. Despite my exhaustion from the long day of travel and setup, alertness coursed through my system like electricity. During my midnight patrol, I discovered fresh footprints in the soft earth near the abandoned storage shed. The impressions were human, but oddly shaped, as if the person had been dragging their feet or walking with an unusual gait. They led from the forest directly to our camp's edge, then circled the perimeter before disappearing back into the woods. Dawn arrived with a gray, overcast sky that cast everything in muted tones and seemed to absorb sound rather than allow it to carry. The children woke slowly, unusually subdued compared to their typical morning energy. Several complained of restless dreams, describing vague nightmares about being watched or followed through endless corridors of trees. I organized the morning activities with deliberate focus on areas within clear sight of our main camp. Nature journaling, basic first aid instruction, and camp cooking lessons kept everyone occupied while I periodically scanned the forest for any signs of the previous night's mysterious visitor. The footprints remained visible in the soft earth, a tangible reminder that our isolation was not as complete as it appeared. Patricia approached during the mid-morning break, her expression troubled. 3 of the kids mentioned hearing strange sounds last night, she reported quietly. Described it as rhythmic tapping or knocking coming from the woods. I dismissed it initially, but when they independently provided the same description, my stomach tightened as she spoke. The implications of someone moving through the forest near our camp under cover of darkness were deeply unsettling, particularly given our vulnerable position and limited communication options. Our emergency radio required line-of-sight transmission to the nearest ranger station, which was blocked by the surrounding hills. We need to establish a buddy system for any activities outside the immediate camp area, I decided. No one goes anywhere alone, including the leaders. The afternoon brought our first direct encounter with evidence of the previous night's intruder. While leading a small group of children on a nature identification walk along the perimeter trail, we discovered a series of disturbing arrangements in the forest. Small animal bones had been carefully positioned in geometric patterns around the base of several trees. The bones were old and weathered, suggesting this activity had been ongoing for some time. 10-year-old Marcus pointed to one particularly elaborate display. "Why would someone do this?" he asked, his voice containing the first note of genuine fear I had heard from many of the children. "Some people have different ways of appreciating nature," I replied carefully, while mentally noting the location for further investigation. Let's continue on the main trail. The bone arrangements were too deliberate to be natural, too numerous to be coincidental, and too disturbing to ignore. Someone had invested considerable time and effort in creating these displays, suggesting a level of familiarity with the area that contradicted the site's supposedly abandoned status. More troubling was the implication that our mysterious visitor had been active in this location for an extended period. As the day progressed, the children's mood continued to deteriorate despite our efforts to maintain normal programming. Games that usually generated enthusiasm met with half-hearted participation. Stories that typically captivated their attention failed to hold their focus. Even the promise of an evening campfire and s'mores creation failed to restore their usual excitement. By late afternoon, I had made the decision to implement heightened security measures. Patricia and I quietly briefed the other leaders on a rotating watch schedule that would ensure continuous monitoring throughout the night. We established silent signals for communication and predetermined gathering points in case rapid evacuation became necessary. The evening meal proceeded without incident, but the atmosphere remained tense. Children huddled closer together than usual, speaking in whispers and frequently glancing toward the darkening forest. Their instinctive awareness of danger impressed and concerned me simultaneously. Young people often possess intuitive understanding of threatening situations that adults dismiss or rationalize away. As darkness settled over our camp, I made the difficult decision to proceed with the traditional night game despite my reservations. Canceling the activity would require explanations that might create panic, while allowing it to continue offered an opportunity to investigate the source of our troubles under controlled conditions. The other leaders and I could use the game as cover for a systematic search of the surrounding area. We gathered the children around the fire for the preliminary briefing, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. Despite their earlier subdued behavior, the prospect of adventure sparked renewed interest in their expressions. I found myself hoping that their excitement would prove justified, and that my growing anxiety was merely the product of an overactive imagination. "Tonight's challenge will test your courage and observation skills," I announced, distributing the flashlights we had prepared for each participant. "You'll follow a marked trail through the forest, encountering various obstacles and mysteries along the way." The trail we had established that afternoon created a loop approximately half a mile in length, staying within reasonable distance of our main camp while providing sufficient challenge to maintain the illusion of adventure. Reflective markers indicated the correct path at regular intervals, and emergency whistles ensured rapid communication in case of problems. As the children prepared for their nighttime expedition, I noticed Patricia checking and rechecking her equipment with unusual intensity. Her typically calm demeanor showed cracks of stress that matched my own internal state. The other leaders demonstrated similar signs of tension, despite our attempts to maintain normal behavior. The first group of children departed with infectious enthusiasm, their flashlight beams dancing through the trees as they followed the marked trail. Their laughter and excited conversation gradually faded into the distance, leaving the rest of us in contemplative silence around the dying fire. I found myself straining to track their progress by sound, mentally mapping their location based on the fading echoes of their voices. The logistics of our night game required careful coordination among the adult leaders, each of whom would be stationed at strategic points along the trail to provide both supervision and entertainment. The tradition involved elaborate costumes and theatrical scares designed to thrill rather than terrify, though the line between those two objectives had always been delicate with our younger participants. I had selected my position at a natural clearing roughly halfway through the trail circuit, where a grove of ancient oak trees created an amphitheater-like space. The location offered excellent visibility in all directions while providing multiple escape routes if circumstances required rapid movement. Years of experience had taught me to always consider worst-case scenarios when working with children in wilderness environments. My costume consisted of a tattered black cloak and an oversized rubber mask designed to resemble a weathered scarecrow. The ensemble was deliberately theatrical rather than genuinely frightening, intended to provoke excited screams followed by relieved laughter. Patricia had helped me practice my dramatic entrance and timing to ensure the effect would be memorable without being traumatic. As I made my way to the designated position, carrying my costume in a canvas bag, the forest around me seemed to pulse with an energy that had been absent during daylight hours. The beam of my flashlight created a moving circle of visibility that only emphasized the vast darkness beyond its reach. Every shadow appeared to shift and change as I passed, creating the illusion of constant movement just outside my field of vision. The clearing looked different at night than it had during my afternoon reconnaissance. What had appeared as a peaceful natural space in daylight now felt exposed and vulnerable. The oak trees that formed its boundaries seemed to lean inward, their branches creating a canopy that blocked most of the ambient light from the overcast sky. I found myself moving more quickly than necessary, eager to complete my preparations and begin the waiting period. Setting up my hiding spot required careful consideration of sight lines and timing. The children would approach from the south along the main trail, and I needed to position myself where I could observe their arrival without being detected. A fallen log provided ideal concealment while allowing rapid movement when the moment came for my dramatic appearance. As I arranged my costume and tested my flashlight's operation, the unnatural silence of the forest became increasingly oppressive. The absence of normal nocturnal sounds created an atmosphere of expectation, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath in anticipation of some significant event. My rational mind attributed this phenomenon to the natural variations in animal behavior, but my instincts screamed warnings that I found increasingly difficult to ignore. The first group of children would reach my position in approximately 15 minutes, giving me time to fully commit to my role and suppress the anxiety that had been building throughout the day. I switched off my flashlight and allowed my eyes to adjust to the darkness, gradually distinguishing shapes and textures in the ambient light that filtered through the canopy. The transformation from visibility to near blindness always required a psychological adjustment that I had never found comfortable. Years of camping experience had familiarized me with the process, but the vulnerability of sightlessness in an unknown environment triggered primal fears that civilization had never fully suppressed. I focused on controlling my breathing and listening for the approaching sounds of excited children. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness as I waited in the darkness, every small sound amplified by the oppressive silence. A branch creaking in the wind became the footstep of an approaching stranger. The rustle of leaves transformed into whispered voices just beyond comprehension. My imagination populated the surrounding forest with threats that my rational mind knew were unlikely, but felt increasingly real. The distinctive sound of multiple flashlights sweeping through the trees announced the approach of the first group. Their excited chatter and occasional nervous laughter provided a reassuring reminder of my actual purpose in this remote location. I prepared for my theatrical entrance, gathering the folds of my cloak and ensuring my mask was properly positioned. As the children entered the clearing, their flashlight beams crisscrossed the space in random patterns, occasionally illuminating my hiding spot before moving on to other areas of interest. Their voices carried clearly in the still air, discussing the trail markers they had encountered and speculating about what surprises awaited them ahead. "This place is really creepy," observed one of the older girls, her voice containing more genuine nervousness than I preferred to hear. "It feels like someone's watching us." Her comment triggered an immediate response from her companions, who began sweeping their lights more systematically around the perimeter of the clearing. I realized that their instinctive awareness of danger was interfering with the intended entertainment value of the experience. Rather than eager anticipation of harmless scares, they were demonstrating genuine fear that threatened to escalate beyond manageable levels. I made the decision to reveal myself earlier than planned, hoping to convert their anxiety into relief through the familiar mechanism of adult supervision and controlled surprise. Rising from my concealment with exaggerated theatrical movements, I activated my flashlight and directed its beam upward to illuminate my costumed figure. "Welcome, brave travelers, to the heart of the ancient forest," I announced in my most dramatically spooky voice, spreading my cloak wide and assuming an appropriately menacing posture. The children's reaction was immediate and gratifying. Shrieks of surprise quickly transformed into laughter and excited commentary as they recognized the familiar pattern of camp theatrics. Their flashlights converged on my position, dispelling the atmosphere of genuine threat that had been building throughout their approach. "You really scared us," called Marcus, his relief evident in the return of his usual confident tone. "We thought something was really wrong." His comment highlighted the delicate balance we attempted to maintain between excitement and genuine fear. The success of our night games depended on creating controlled danger that challenged the children without overwhelming their emotional resources. This year, however, the ambient atmosphere of the location seemed to tip the balance toward genuine anxiety, regardless of our careful planning. As I completed my performance and directed the group toward the next segment of their trail, movement at the edge of the clearing caught my attention. A figure stood motionless among the trees, clearly visible in the backwash of the children's flashlights but somehow separate from our group. My initial assumption was that one of the other leaders had arrived early to observe my performance, but something about the silhouette seemed wrong. The figure at the forest's edge remained perfectly still as the children continued their journey along the marked trail, their voices and flashlight beams gradually receding into the distance. I maintained my position in the clearing, ostensibly gathering my props but actually studying the motionless shape that had captured my attention. Years of wilderness experience had taught me to trust visual anomalies as potential indicators of danger. As the last echoes of the children's passage faded, the oppressive silence returned with renewed intensity. The figure had not moved during the entire interaction, displaying a level of stillness that seemed unnatural for a human being. Animals typically demonstrated either obvious alertness or complete relaxation, but this presence suggested something different entirely. I called out in a conversational tone, assuming the figure was one of my fellow leaders who had arrived early for their own segment of the night game. "Patricia? Is that you?" The first group just passed through. No response came from the darkness. The figure remained motionless, neither acknowledging my presence nor retreating from view. I felt the first stirrings of genuine alarm as I realized that this person was not part of our planned activities. The implications of an unknown individual observing our children's nighttime activities sent adrenaline coursing through my system. Activating my flashlight, I directed its beam toward the mysterious figure, expecting to illuminate one of several familiar possibilities. A lost hiker seeking assistance, a local resident investigating our presence, or perhaps a teenage prankster from a nearby community. What the light revealed defied all of these rational explanations. The person wore a collection of tattered fabric that might once have been clothing, but now resembled an assemblage of burlap sacks and deteriorating canvas. The material was stained with dark patches that could have been mud, rust, or something more disturbing. Most unsettling was the head covering, an arrangement of plastic bags and torn fabric that obscured any facial features while creating a nightmarish approximation of human appearance. The figure's posture suggested patient observation rather than random wandering. Both arms hung motionless at its sides, and its head was turned directly toward my position with the focused attention of a predator studying potential prey. The clothing appeared to be caked with dried mud or worse, giving the entire form an archaeological quality, as if it had emerged from some ancient burial ground. As my flashlight beam illuminated the disturbing apparition, it began a rhythmic motion that took several seconds for my brain to process. The figure was methodically striking its head against the trunk of a nearby oak tree, producing a hollow knocking sound that explained the mysterious noises the children had reported hearing during the previous night. The repetitive head striking continued with mechanical precision, each impact creating the same dull thud that carried clearly through the still air. There was no indication of pain or discomfort, no variation in rhythm or intensity, just the endless repetition of self-destructive behavior that suggested severe mental disturbance or something worse. I attempted to establish communication once more, raising my voice and projecting authority, despite the fear that was rapidly overwhelming my system. "You need to identify yourself immediately. This is a supervised youth activity, and your presence is not authorized." The response was immediate and terrifying. The figure ceased its rhythmic head striking and turned to face me directly, despite the plastic covering that should have limited its vision. For several heartbeats, we remained frozen in mutual observation, predator and prey, assessing each other across the short distance that separated us. Then it began to move toward me with deliberate, unhurried steps that suggested complete confidence in the outcome of our encounter. There was no indication of hostility or aggression, just the patient advance of something that had decided upon a course of action. The plastic bags around its head rustled softly with each movement, creating a sound like wind through dry leaves. Every instinct I possessed screamed warnings about remaining in the clearing. This was not a confused hiker or harmless eccentric who could be managed through calm communication and common sense. The systematic self-harm, the deliberate observation of our children, and the nightmarish appearance combined to create a threat profile that demanded immediate retreat. I abandoned any pretense of maintaining my position for the night game and fled toward the main camp with desperate urgency. Behind me, the sound of pursuing footsteps confirmed that my decision to run had been correct. The figure was following with the same deliberate pace it had demonstrated while approaching, neither hurrying nor falling behind. The trail back to camp had seemed clearly marked during daylight, but navigation in darkness while being pursued proved far more challenging than I had anticipated. Reflective markers that should have guided my path were difficult to locate with the hasty sweeps of my flashlight, and several times I nearly veered into the unmarked forest that would have led me away from safety. The sounds of pursuit remained constant behind me, never drawing closer, but never falling behind. My unknown follower seemed to possess an intimate knowledge of the terrain that allowed navigation without visible light, while my own progress was hampered by the need to constantly verify my direction and avoid obstacles. As I ran through the forest, branches tearing at my costume and roots threatening to trip me with every step, my mind raced through possible explanations for what I had encountered. Mental illness could account for the bizarre appearance and self-destructive behavior, but not for the systematic observation of our camp or the confident pursuit through difficult terrain. More disturbing was the possibility that this individual represented a more organized threat. The bone arrangements we had discovered earlier in the day, the evidence of recent activity around the abandoned facilities, and now this direct encounter suggested a pattern of behavior that had been developing over time rather than a random occurrence. The familiar glow of our campfire finally appeared through the trees ahead, providing a beacon of safety that drew me forward with renewed energy. I burst into the circle of light around our camp, startling Patricia and the other leaders who were engaged in quiet conversation while waiting for the night game participants to complete their circuit. "We have a serious problem," I announced between gasps for breath, struggling to convert my panic into coherent communication. "There's someone in the woods. Someone dangerous." The other leaders gathered around me as I attempted to describe my encounter while catching my breath and checking the forest behind me for signs of continued pursuit. Patricia immediately began organizing a head count of all children and adults, while Marcus distributed additional flashlights and emergency whistles to anyone who lacked them. "Did you get a clear look at this person?" asked David, our senior outdoor instructor and the most experienced member of our leadership team. His calm demeanor provided a steadying influence as I struggled to organize my thoughts and present a coherent account of the events. I described the tattered clothing, the plastic head covering, the rhythmic self-harm, and the deliberate pursuit through the forest. As I spoke, I could see skepticism developing in some faces, the natural tendency to seek rational explanations for events that challenged normal experience. My own words sounded incredible even to me, like the product of an overactive imagination rather than objective observation. "Could it have been one of the local teenagers playing a prank?" suggested Jennifer, our youngest leader, and someone who typically tried to find innocent explanations for concerning situations. "Halloween costumes can look pretty realistic in the dark." The suggestion was reasonable, and I wanted desperately to accept it as the correct interpretation of my experience. Teenage pranks were manageable problems that could be addressed through normal channels of communication and authority. However, the systematic nature of what I had observed suggested something far more troubling than adolescent mischief. "The head banging against the tree," I replied slowly, "was not performance. This person was actually injuring themselves repeatedly. No teenager would maintain that behavior for the length of time I observed." Patricia completed her count and confirmed that all participants in the night game were accounted for, either having completed the circuit and returned to camp or still progressing along the marked trail under supervision of other leaders positioned at strategic intervals. The organized nature of our activity had prevented any confusion about personnel locations. "We need to collect the remaining groups immediately," I declared, my concern for the children still on the trail overriding any consideration of maintaining normal programming. "I don't want anyone alone in those woods." David agreed to coordinate the early termination of the night game, while Patricia and I prepared emergency communication equipment for contact with outside authorities. Our protocol required documentation of any safety threats and notification of appropriate agencies, though the remote location and limited communication options complicated the process. As the leaders dispersed to implement our emergency procedures, I remained near the fire to watch for any signs of approach from the forest. The familiar sounds of our camp activities provided reassurance, but I found myself constantly scanning the darkness beyond our circle of light for movement or other indications that we remained under observation. The systematic collection of all participants required nearly an hour, as the marked trail extended over a considerable distance and several groups needed to be recalled from their positions. Each returning group brought reports of unusual sounds and a general atmosphere of unease that had pervaded their experience, confirming that my encounter was part of a larger pattern of disturbing activity. When the final group returned to camp, I assembled everyone around the central fire for a modified version of our traditional closing ceremony. The children were obviously disappointed by the abbreviated program, but their safety took precedence over entertainment value. I explained that we had encountered unexpected circumstances that required enhanced security measures without providing details that might create panic. "Will we continue the camping trip tomorrow?" asked one of the older children, her question reflecting the concerns that were visible in many faces around the fire. "We're evaluating the situation," I replied carefully, avoiding commitments that circumstances might force me to break. "Your safety is our primary concern, and we'll make decisions based on the most current information available." The diplomatic answer satisfied no one but avoided creating the kind of fear that could escalate into panic. Children often demonstrated remarkable resilience when faced with clearly defined challenges, but uncertainty and vague threats could overwhelm their emotional resources and create management problems that complicated our ability to respond effectively. As we organized the children into their sleeping arrangements with enhanced supervision, Patricia approached me with additional disturbing information. Several of the leaders who had been stationed along the trail reported glimpsing movement in the forest beyond their assigned positions, always at the edge of their vision and never clearly enough to identify specific details. "It's possible that our mystery person wasn't alone," she said quietly, ensuring that her words would not carry to the children who were settling into their tents nearby. "The reports suggest coordinated observation of our entire operation. The implications of multiple individuals monitoring our activities from concealment represented a threat level that exceeded our ability to manage with current resources. A single disturbed person might be handled through careful avoidance and appropriate law enforcement notification, but a group suggested planning and organization that indicated more serious criminal intent. I made the decision to implement a full security watch throughout the remaining hours of darkness, with adult leaders maintaining continuous patrol around the perimeter of our camp. Sleep would be sacrificed in favor of vigilance, and any further contact with unknown individuals would trigger immediate evacuation procedures." The children eventually settled into restless sleep, their conversations gradually fading to silence as exhaustion overcame their anxiety about the evening's disrupted activities. The adult leaders maintained their assigned positions around the camp's perimeter, each equipped with emergency communication devices and detailed instructions for responding to various threat scenarios. Despite my physical exhaustion from the day's activities and the adrenaline crash following my encounter in the forest, sleep remained impossible. Every small sound triggered heightened alertness as I strained to distinguish between normal nocturnal activity and potential indicators of unwelcome visitors. The boundary between rational caution and paranoid hypervigilance became increasingly difficult to maintain. As the hours passed, reports from the perimeter guards confirmed the presence of observers in the surrounding forest. Flashlight beams occasionally revealed figures moving among the trees, always at distances too great for detailed observation, but close enough to confirm that our camp remained under surveillance. The watchers appeared to maintain a consistent distance, neither approaching our defenses nor retreating beyond visual range. The psychological pressure of prolonged observation by unknown individuals proved nearly as exhausting as physical threat. Knowing that hostile eyes were evaluating our positions and activities created a tension that infected every aspect of our environment, making normal rest impossible and rational decision-making increasingly difficult. The first gray light of dawn provided welcome relief from the oppressive darkness that had dominated the previous 8 hours. As visibility gradually improved, the reports of mysterious figures observing our camp ceased, suggesting that our watchers preferred the concealment that night provided. The children woke slowly, their usual morning energy subdued by disturbed sleep and the tension that had pervaded the camp. I organized a quick breakfast using portable supplies that required minimal preparation, eager to address the security situation before the day's heat made extended outdoor activity more challenging. Patricia and David volunteered to accompany me on a daylight investigation of my encounter site, while the remaining leaders maintained supervision of the children and prepared for possible emergency evacuation. The trail that had seemed so threatening in darkness revealed itself as a straightforward path through typical mixed forest, marked with the reflective tape we had installed to guide the night game participants. In daylight, the terrain looked manageable and familiar, lacking the menacing quality that darkness had created. However, the disturbing discoveries we made along the way confirmed that my nighttime fears had been justified. The first indication of ongoing activity appeared approximately halfway to the clearing where I had encountered the mysterious figure. A series of small objects hung from tree branches at irregular intervals, creating a bizarre gallery that extended for several hundred yards along the trail. As we drew closer, the objects resolved into recognizable forms that made my stomach clench with revulsion. Small animal carcasses, in various stages of decomposition, dangled from thin ropes or wire attachments. Squirrels, rabbits, and birds had been arranged in deliberate patterns that suggested ritualistic rather than practical purposes. Some appeared freshly killed, while others had been weathering for weeks or months, creating a timeline of activity that extended far beyond our brief presence in the area. "This has been going on for a long time," Patricia observed, her voice tight with controlled disgust as she examined the display. "Whoever did this has been using this location regularly." David documented the scene with his camera while maintaining careful attention to our surroundings. His military background had trained him to evaluate tactical situations, and I could see growing concern in his expression as he assessed the implications of what we were discovering. "The positioning is strategic," he noted, indicating the sight lines that the hanging objects created through the forest. "Someone could monitor movement along this entire section of trail from concealed positions. We've been under observation since we arrived." The trail leading to my encounter site revealed additional disturbing evidence. Footprints in the soft earth showed multiple individuals moving through the area, some wearing conventional footwear, but others displaying the dragging gait pattern I had noticed during my initial patrol. The tracks were too numerous and varied to represent a single person, confirming Patricia's speculation about coordinated surveillance. When we reached the clearing where I had confronted the plastic-wrapped figure, the scene initially appeared normal. The oak trees stood in their natural arrangements, and the forest floor showed only the expected accumulation of leaves and fallen branches. However, closer examination revealed signs of regular use that transformed an apparently peaceful location into something far more sinister. The tree where I had witnessed the rhythmic head-striking showed clear evidence of repeated impact. The bark had been worn away in a distinct pattern approximately 6 feet from the ground, creating a smooth depression that was stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Fresh scratches in the wood indicated that the behavior I had observed was part of an ongoing pattern. More disturbing was the discovery of deliberately arranged objects around the base of the impact tree. Bones, both animal and unidentifiable, had been carefully positioned in geometric patterns that suggested ritual significance. Among the bones were personal items that clearly did not belong in a wilderness setting: a child's backpack, several items of clothing, and a collection of identification documents that made my blood freeze. Patricia picked up one of the ID cards with trembling hands. "This belongs to a girl who was reported missing from a town about 50 miles from here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The disappearance was 3 months ago." The implications of finding missing person effects at a site of obvious ritualistic activity exceeded anything we were equipped to handle. Whatever we had stumbled into represented a level of criminal activity that demanded immediate law enforcement intervention and emergency evacuation of our children from the area. David had already activated our emergency radio and was attempting to establish contact with the nearest ranger station. The mountainous terrain that surrounded our location interfered with transmission, requiring him to move around the clearing while adjusting antenna positions and trying different frequencies. His frustrated expression indicated that communication was proving more difficult than anticipated. As we worked to establish outside contact, movement at the edge of the clearing caught my attention. The same figure I had encountered the previous night stood motionless among the trees, observing our investigation with the patient attention of a predator watching prey. The daylight revealed additional disturbing details about its appearance and behavior. The plastic covering around its head was actually a complex arrangement of various types of bags and sheeting, layered and secured in a way that completely obscured facial features while allowing some degree of vision. The clothing was indeed composed of burlap and canvas materials, but the dark stains I had assumed were mud showed a reddish quality in natural light that suggested a more disturbing origin. Most unsettling was the figure's absolute stillness while under direct observation. No human being could maintain such perfect immobility without demonstrating some sign of natural movement, breathing, slight position adjustments, or involuntary muscle responses. This thing displayed none of these normal physiological indicators, creating the impression of something that existed outside normal biological limitations. "It's watching us," I said quietly, indicating the motionless observer with a slight gesture that avoided sudden movements. Patricia and David turned slowly to examine the figure, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they processed what they were seeing. The rational explanations that had seemed plausible during our previous discussions evaporated when confronted with direct visual evidence of the threat we faced. The figure began the same rhythmic head-striking behavior I had witnessed during our previous encounter, moving to a different tree and beginning the repetitive self-harm that created the hollow knocking sound. However, this time the action seemed intended as communication rather than random compulsion, a deliberate signal that our presence had been noted and that some form of response was being initiated. The mechanical precision of the head striking continued as we completed our investigation and prepared to return to camp. David's efforts to establish radio communication had finally succeeded in reaching a ranger station, but the conversation revealed the complexity of our situation and the limited options available for immediate assistance. "The nearest law enforcement unit is more than 2 hours away," he reported after completing the transmission. "They're requesting that we maintain our current position while they coordinate with state police and organize an appropriate response team." The instruction to remain in place contradicted every instinct I possessed about protecting the children under my supervision. 2 hours represented an unacceptable delay when faced with unknown threats who had demonstrated both the capability and willingness to monitor our activities. The discovery of missing person effects elevated the situation beyond simple harassment into potential kidnapping and worse. "We need to evacuate immediately," I declared, making the decision that my responsibility to the children superseded official instructions. "Our vehicles are packed and ready. We can be back to civilization before any response team arrives here." Patricia supported my assessment, recognizing that our remote location and limited defensive capabilities made remaining in place an unacceptable risk. The organized nature of the surveillance we had been under suggested planning and coordination that exceeded our ability to defend against with available resources. As we began our return journey to camp, the figure at the clearing maintained its observation but made no attempt to follow or intercept our movement. However, glimpses of additional watchers among the trees indicated that our departure was being monitored by multiple individuals who remained concealed until we passed their positions. The trail back to camp revealed evidence of increased activity since our morning departure. Fresh footprints crisscrossed our earlier tracks, and several of the hanging animal carcasses had been repositioned or replaced with more recent kills. The systematic nature of these changes suggested that our investigation had triggered some form of response from whoever maintained this disturbing territory. When we reached our camp, the other leaders immediately noticed our shaken expressions and began implementing emergency procedures without requiring detailed explanations. Children were organized into travel groups, equipment was rapidly packed into vehicles, and emergency supplies were distributed to ensure readiness for immediate departure. "We're leaving early due to weather concerns," I announced to the assembled children, providing a plausible explanation that avoided creating panic while motivating cooperation with our urgent preparations. "Please gather your personal items quickly and help your teammates prepare for departure." The efficiency with which our group responded to the evacuation order reflected the quality of our preparation and the trust that existed between leaders and participants. Within 30 minutes, all personal belongings were secured, camping equipment was loaded, and vehicles were ready for departure. The children demonstrated remarkable cooperation despite their obvious disappointment about the abbreviated trip. As we conducted final checks and prepared to leave the site, Patricia discovered additional evidence that confirmed the wisdom of our decision to evacuate. Fresh footprints completely encircled our camp, indicating that we had been under close observation throughout the night. The tracks showed that multiple individuals had approached to within a few yards of our sleeping areas without being detected by our security patrols. "They could have taken any of us," she said quietly, examining the clear impressions in the soft earth near the children's tents. The fact that they didn't suggest they were evaluating rather than acting immediately. The implications of being surrounded by unknown individuals while we slept sent chills through my system that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. Our defensive measures had been completely inadequate against adversaries who possessed superior knowledge of the terrain and demonstrated ability to move undetected through difficult conditions. David completed a final radio transmission to update the authorities on our departure, providing detailed location information and requesting that responding units continue their investigation despite our absence. The evidence we had discovered demanded professional examination, and the missing person connections required immediate follow-up by qualified investigators. As our convoy of vehicles pulled away from the campsite, I found myself constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. The forest that had seemed so peaceful during our arrival now appeared to contain threats in every shadow and movement among the trees. The children's excited chatter about returning home provided a welcome distraction from my growing paranoia about being followed. The gravel road leading away from the campsite stretched ahead like a lifeline, connecting us to safety and civilization. However, the slow progress necessitated by the rough terrain made the journey feel interminable, and I found myself urging our drivers to increase speed despite the potential for vehicle damage from potholes and embedded rocks. Approximately halfway through our escape route, Patricia pointed to movement in the forest that paralleled our path. Figures were keeping pace with our vehicles, moving through the trees with an efficiency that suggested intimate familiarity with the terrain. They maintained sufficient distance to avoid clear observation while demonstrating their ability to monitor our departure. "They're making sure we leave," David observed, his military experience allowing him to interpret the tactical implications of what we were witnessing. This suggests territorial behavior rather than random predation. They want us gone, but aren't preventing our departure. The distinction was important for understanding the threat level we faced, but provided little comfort while still within the boundaries of whatever domain these individuals claimed. I would not feel safe until we reached the main highway and could establish communication with outside authorities who possessed the resources to investigate properly. As we finally reached the paved road that marked the boundary between wilderness and civilization, the sense of relief was overwhelming. The children cheered as the vehicles picked up speed on smooth pavement, and the adult leaders visibly relaxed as the forest fell behind us. However, the memory of our experience would remain with all of us, a reminder that some places harbor secrets that civilization has forgotten or chosen to ignore. The return journey to our home base passed in contemplative silence among the adult leaders, while the children gradually processed their abbreviated camping experience through animated discussions about the weather emergency that had forced our early departure. Their resilience and adaptability impressed me, but I wondered how long our carefully constructed explanation would satisfy their natural curiosity about the real reasons for our hasty evacuation. Our arrival at the regional office triggered a series of administrative procedures that consumed the remainder of the day. Parents were contacted and provided with modified accounts of our experience that emphasized safety protocols without revealing the disturbing details that would create unnecessary alarm. Official incident reports required careful wording to document facts while avoiding sensational elements that might be misinterpreted. The state police investigators who interviewed me several hours later demonstrated professional competence but obvious skepticism about the more unusual aspects of my account. Missing person connections demanded thorough investigation, but the ritualistic elements and coordinated surveillance seemed to challenge their conventional understanding of criminal behavior patterns. Groups of mentally disturbed individuals occasionally establish informal communities in remote areas, the lead investigator explained, offering the most rational interpretation available for what we had encountered. Social services agencies periodically locate such settlements and provide appropriate assistance or intervention. His explanation provided a framework for understanding our experience that avoided supernatural or conspiracy theory interpretations. However, The systematic nature of the surveillance and the evidence of long-term territorial behavior suggested organization and planning that exceeded typical expectations for randomly assembled groups of disturbed individuals. The investigation team departed for the campsite location within hours of our interview, equipped with specialized communication equipment and sufficient personnel to conduct a thorough examination of the area. Their findings would determine whether criminal charges were appropriate and what measures might be necessary to prevent future incidents. Patricia and I completed our administrative responsibilities and began the process of analyzing our experience for lessons that might improve future expedition planning. The site selection protocols that had led us to Pine Valley Wilderness Camp clearly required enhancement to include investigation of previous operational history and verification of actual abandonment status. We should have investigated more thoroughly before bringing children to an unfamiliar location, Patricia reflected as we reviewed our decision-making process. The reduced cost should have been a warning sign rather than an attractive feature. Her assessment was accurate, and I found myself questioning the judgment that had prioritized budgetary considerations over comprehensive safety evaluation. The pressure to provide affordable programming for our youth participants had influenced decisions in ways that compromised our fundamental responsibility for their protection. The investigation results became available several days later through official channels that provided limited detail but confirmed the substance of our concerns. The site had indeed been occupied by a group of individuals who had established an informal settlement in the abandoned facilities. Evidence of criminal activity was sufficient to warrant ongoing investigation, though specific details remained confidential. Missing person cases connected to the area were being reviewed by a specialized task force that would coordinate with agencies from multiple jurisdictions. The scope of the investigation suggested that our encounter represented a small portion of a larger pattern of activity that had been developing over an extended period. More disturbing was the revelation that Pine Valley Wilderness Camp had been the subject of previous incident reports that had been inadequately investigated or documented. Our experience was not an isolated occurrence, but part of a recurring pattern that had been overlooked or dismissed by previous authorities. The knowledge that we had inadvertently exposed our children to a documented threat zone filled me with guilt and anger that required considerable time to process constructively. Our youth programming would continue, but with enhanced safety protocols and investigation procedures that would prevent similar oversights in the future. The children who participated in our abbreviated camping trip demonstrated remarkable resilience in processing their experience. Follow-up conversations revealed that many had sensed the underlying tension and genuine danger, but their trust in adult leadership had prevented panic and facilitated our successful evacuation. Their maturity and cooperation had probably saved lives. Several parents requested additional information about the weather emergency that had terminated the trip, but most accepted our explanations and praised our cautious approach to safety management. The camping program's reputation for responsible leadership helped deflect suspicions that might have developed from more detailed questioning. Months later, news reports occasionally mentioned ongoing investigations in remote wilderness areas where unauthorized settlements had been discovered and dismantled. The individuals involved were typically described as mentally disturbed transients who required social services intervention rather than criminal prosecution. Reading these reports triggered memories of our encounter that remained vivid despite the passage of time. I never learned the specific outcome of the Pine Valley investigation, as case details remained confidential and media coverage focused on general patterns rather than specific incidents. However, the site was permanently closed to recreational use, and access roads were gated to prevent unauthorized entry. The experience fundamentally changed my approach to wilderness programming and risk assessment. Subsequent expeditions involved exhaustive site investigation, communication with local authorities, and verification of recent activity levels before any children were exposed to unfamiliar environments. The additional preparation time and expense were justified by the enhanced safety assurance they provided. Despite the disturbing nature of our encounter, the incident strengthened my appreciation for the instinctive awareness that children often demonstrate when confronted with genuinely dangerous situations. Their natural sensitivity to environmental threats exceeded adult analytical capabilities in several instances, providing early warning that our rational minds had dismissed or rationalized away. The memory of those plastic-wrapped figures watching from the forest remains vivid years later, a reminder that civilization's reach does not extend into every corner of our landscape. Some places harbor individuals and activities that exist outside normal social boundaries, creating pockets of danger that can only be avoided through careful preparation and healthy respect for the unknown. Our profession demands optimism and confidence in our ability to protect the young people entrusted to our care. However, the Pine Valley experience taught me that some threats cannot be managed through planning and preparation alone. Sometimes the wisest course of action is recognition of our limitations and strategic withdrawal before circumstances escalate beyond our ability to control. The bonds forged between our leadership team during that crisis have remained strong, built on shared experience of genuine danger and successful collaboration under pressure. We occasionally discuss the incident and speculate about what might have happened if we had remained at the site longer or attempted to confront the situation more aggressively. Those conversations always conclude with gratitude for our successful evacuation and determination to maintain the vigilance that protected our children from harm. The responsibility of youth leadership carries risks that extend beyond conventional outdoor hazards, requiring awareness of human threats that prefer darkness and isolation for their activities. I continue to lead wilderness expeditions because the benefits of outdoor education outweigh the risks when proper precautions are implemented. However, the knowledge that evil can establish itself in remote places where normal oversight does not reach has made me a more cautious and thorough guardian of the children who depend on my judgment for their safety. The forest keeps its secrets, but some of those secrets are better left undisturbed. My name is Alton Merton, and this happened during a job that was unlike any other. For most of my life, I worked for a secret cryptid hunting unit within the U.S. government. It's a job that sounds ridiculous until you're the one standing toe-to-toe with things that shouldn't exist. I always figured the job would end one of two ways. I'd retire quietly, or I'd vanish into the wilderness, becoming one of the many missing persons our unit tracks. I never thought I'd live to tell this story. The call came in on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just settled into my apartment after wrapping up a case in northern Michigan. Something about livestock mutilations that turned out to be coyotes with unusual hunting patterns. Nothing supernatural, just nature being brutal in new ways. I was 3 sips into my first decent bourbon in weeks when my secure phone buzzed. "Merton," I answered, already reaching for my go bag. "We need you in Oregon. Yesterday." It was Director Holloway, her voice tight with the particular strain that meant civilians were already dead. 12 hours later, I was stepping off a military transport at a small airfield near the Cascade Range. The late September air carried the first bite of autumn, and fog clung to the forest like a shroud. We were dispatched to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, a place where the trees rise like giants and the fog rolls in thick, swallowing the world whole. The mission was straightforward on paper. Reports of missing hikers had spiked in the region, more than usual, and some of the recovered remains bore signs of violent death, signs that didn't match any known predator. My team consisted of me, our tracker Sam Powell, a stoic guy with a knack for finding anyone, anywhere. Jane Harper, our weapons specialist who could hit a target at 100 yards without blinking. And our tech wizard, Max Lang, who handled everything from satellite phones to drones. We were a tight-knit group, each of us having saved the other's skin more than once. Sam met me at the airfield, his weathered face grim beneath his salt and pepper beard. 6 missing in the last month, he said, handing me a folder as we walked to the waiting jeep. 2 bodies recovered, the rest... He trailed off, letting the implication hang. Jane and Max were already at the ranger station, converting a back room into our operations center. Jane was methodically cleaning her rifle, her movements precise and mechanical. Max hunched over 3 laptops, satellite imagery flickering across the screens. "The latest victim is Emily Dawson," Max said without looking up. 32. Experienced hiker, local guide, went out for a day hike 4 days ago and never came back. I studied the map they'd pinned to the wall, red pins marking the last known locations of the missing, blue ones where bodies had been found. No discernible pattern except they all disappeared within a roughly 20 square mile area. Any connections between the victims? I asked. Jane shook her head. Different ages, backgrounds, experience levels. Only thing they have in common is they all went missing in the same general area. What about the bodies? I asked, dreading the answer. That's where it gets interesting, Max said, pulling up photos I wish I could unsee. Medical examiner found puncture wounds that don't match any known predator. Spacing's all wrong for bear, cougar, or wolf, and there's this. He zoomed in on what looked like strange markings around the wounds. Almost like the tissue was dissolved. We spent the rest of the day prepping gear and studying topographical maps. As darkness fell, I stepped outside the station, watching as the mist thickened into impenetrable fog. The forest seemed to breathe in the darkness, ancient and patient. Something was out there, hiding in that primeval wilderness, something that had developed a taste for human flesh. And tomorrow, we were going hunting. We set up base camp near the last known location of Emily Dawson. She had been an experienced trekker, familiar with the dangers of the wilderness. Her disappearance had raised more than a few eyebrows. As I zipped my tent closed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that whatever lurked in these woods was already aware of our presence. I checked my sidearm before lying down, finding cold comfort in its weight. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by dreams of moving shadows and distant inhuman cries echoing through endless trees. We started our search at dawn, the forest still shrouded in mist, our breath visible in the crisp morning air. Sam took point, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of passage. Jane flanked our right, rifle at the ready, while Max monitored our location and deployed small reconnaissance drones to scout ahead. The forest felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. Too still. The towering Douglas firs and ancient cedars created a cathedral-like space, their branches interlacing high above to block out most of the sunlight. What little made it through created dappled patterns on the forest floor, shifting like liquid as the wind stirred the canopy. Park ranger said Emily was headed to Blackwater Ridge, Sam said, consulting his GPS. It's about 4 miles northeast of here, popular spot for photographers because of the view. We moved in silence, each of us scanning our surroundings. My skin prickled with the sensation of being observed, though whenever I turned to look, there was nothing but trees and undergrowth. Hours passed with nothing to show for our efforts, no tracks, no broken branches, nothing to indicate where Emily might have gone. The landscape became increasingly rugged, forcing us to navigate steep ravines and dense thickets of thorny brush. "Something's off," Jane muttered as we paused to check our bearings. "We should have seen some wildlife by now. Squirrels, birds, something." She was right. The forest was unnaturally silent, as if the local fauna had fled or gone into hiding. It wasn't until the afternoon that we found something. A scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush, stained with blood. Sam examined it closely, his face grim. "This is recent," he said, "less than a day old." Max bagged the sample while Jane documented our location. I scanned the surrounding area, looking for any other signs of disturbance. "There," I said, pointing to a faint depression in the loamy soil. "Looks like something was dragged." Sam crouched, studying the ground with practiced eyes. "Good catch. Direction is..." He pointed deeper into the forest, away from the established trails. "That way." We pressed on, the mood somber. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth thicker, making progress slow and arduous. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of leaves. The temperature dropped noticeably as we descended into a narrow valley. The soil grew damp beneath our boots, and the vegetation changed from sunlight-loving ferns to mushrooms and moss that thrived in darkness. It was around then that I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds, chattering squirrels, had ceased entirely. An unnatural quiet had settled in, as if the very air was holding its breath. "Something's not right," Jane muttered, her eyes scanning the trees, rifle raised slightly. We moved cautiously, weapons at the ready. The tension was palpable, every step measured, every sense straining for the slightest hint of danger. The trail of disturbed earth and occasional blood smears led us deeper into the valley, to a place where the trees grew so close together that we had to move single file. The ground sloped sharply downward, and the air grew colder still, carrying the mineral smell of underground water and wet stone. That's when we stumbled upon the cave. It was hidden behind a thick curtain of vines, its entrance yawning like a black hole against the hillside. If not for the trail we were following, we might have walked right past it. "Think this is where our missing hikers ended up?" Max whispered, his voice barely audible. "One way to find out," I replied, unclipping my flashlight. The entrance was roughly 8 feet high and twice as wide, with strange weathering patterns that made the rock look almost like it had been melted rather than eroded. The ground in front showed signs of frequent passage, not human footprints, but something else, something that dragged itself along the ground. Max deployed a small drone, sending it inside to scout the area. We huddled around his tablet, watching the grainy night vision feed as the drone penetrated the darkness. The feed showed a narrow tunnel leading into a larger chamber, the walls marked with strange, almost ritualistic carvings. They didn't match any cultural pattern I recognized, not Native American, not European, not anything human. "I need to get a closer look at those markings," I said, checking my sidearm. "This place gives me the creeps," Max muttered. "Stay sharp," I told them. "We go in, we document, we get out. No heroics." "I'll go first," I said, taking point. The cave was cold and damp, the air heavy with the scent of decay. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing more of the eerie carvings. They depicted creatures that were neither human nor animal, grotesque amalgamations that defied logic. Some showed scenes of hunting, others of feeding. All featured the same elongated skeletal figures pursuing prey. The narrow entrance tunnel widened after about 50 feet, opening into the chamber we'd seen on the drone feed. The ceiling rose to at least 20 feet, creating an echoing space large enough to hold dozens of people. We reached the chamber, and the stench hit us like a physical force, the unmistakable odor of decomposing flesh, so strong it made my eyes water. As our lights swept the space, the source became clear. Bodies, or what was left of them, were scattered around. Some were recent, others in varying stages of decomposition. It was a gruesome sight, enough to churn even the strongest stomach. "Dear God," Jane whispered, covering her nose and mouth. I counted at least 8 distinct corpses, some partially consumed, others seemingly preserved for later consumption. Among the newer remains, I spotted hiking gear that matched the description of Emily Dawson's equipment. Max began documenting the scene, his camera flashing as he took photographs for evidence. Sam moved carefully around the perimeter, examining the ground and walls. "These markings," he said, tracing a weathered hand over one of the carvings. "They're old, very old." As we inspected the remains, noting details for our report, a sound echoed through the cave, a scraping noise like claws on stone coming from deeper within the mountain. We turned as one, flashlights sweeping the chamber. At the far end, previously hidden in shadow, a narrow passage led further into the earth. And from that passage, a figure emerged. It was tall, emaciated, with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the light. Its skin was a mottled gray, and its mouth was filled with jagged teeth, too many to fit in what approximated a human jaw. The creature moved with a jerking, insect-like motion that sent primal fear coursing through my veins. We fired without hesitation, bullets tearing through the air. The muzzle flashes were blinding in the darkness, the reports deafening in the confined space. The creature moved with unnatural speed, dodging most of our shots. It let out a shriek that reverberated through the cave, making my ears ring. A sound like metal scraping against metal, amplified to painful levels. "Center mass," I shouted, adjusting my aim. Jane managed to land a hit, and the creature stumbled, black ichor spraying from its shoulder. But it didn't fall. Instead, it seemed enraged, its movements becoming more frenzied and unpredictable. "Fall back," I shouted, retreating towards the tunnel. "Sam, Max, go." They didn't need to be told twice. Sam and Max were ahead, Jane close behind. I brought up the rear, firing controlled bursts to keep the creature at bay. My rounds found their mark, punching through the thing's torso, but it kept coming, seemingly impervious to wounds that would have dropped any natural predator. As we reached the tunnel entrance, the creature lunged, crossing the distance between us with impossible speed. Its claws raked across Jane's back, tearing through her tactical vest like it was tissue paper. She cried out, collapsing to the ground. "Jane!" Max yelled, turning to help her. But the creature was on her in an instant, its elongated fingers wrapping around her throat, lifting her off the ground. I emptied my magazine into it, each impact causing it to twitch, but not deterring it. "Get out!" Jane managed to gasp, her hands scrabbling at the thing's grip. She reached for something on her belt, a grenade. I grabbed Max, pulling him back as the creature tore into Jane. "She's giving us a chance," I hissed. "We have to go. Now!" We retreated down the tunnel, the sounds of struggle fading behind us. Then came a muffled thump that shook dust from the ceiling. Jane had pulled the pin. We burst from the cave, gasping for air. The daylight was blinding after the darkness of the tunnel. Sam was already calling for extraction, his voice steady despite the chaos. We didn't stop moving until we reached the relative safety of our camp, putting distance between us and whatever might emerge from that cave. "Did you see that thing?" Max wheezed, hands on his knees as he fought to catch his breath. "What the hell was it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Nothing in our database matches that morphology." "Jane," Sam's voice broke. She knew what she was doing. We fell silent, each processing the horror we'd witnessed and the loss of our teammate. The extraction team arrived within the hour, but it was too late for Jane. Her sacrifice had bought us time to escape, but the weight of her death pressed down on us like a physical force. Back at the ranger station, we debriefed with Director Holloway via secure video link. Her face remained impassive as we described the creature and the cave of horrors it had made its lair. "The markings suggest it's been there a long time," I explained. "Generations, maybe centuries. Local legends mention shadow stealers that take people who venture too deep into the forest." "And you're certain the explosive eliminated the threat?" Holloway asked. "No," I said honestly. "The tunnel partially collapsed, but we can't confirm the creature was neutralized. If it survived, it's trapped for now, but caves like that often have multiple exits." Holloway's expression hardened. "I'm sending in a containment team. They'll seal the cave system and monitor for any activity." "What about Jane?" Max asked. "Official report will list her as killed by a bear attack during a wildlife survey," Holloway replied. "Her family will receive full benefits and commendations for service to her country." The loss weighed heavily on us all, a stark reminder of the dangers we faced. The creature, whatever it was, remained an unsolved mystery lurking in the wilderness. I couldn't shake the image of its glowing eyes, the way it moved with such unnatural precision, the fact that our bullets seemed to merely inconvenience it. In the aftermath, we reported back to our superiors, detailing the events as best we could. The official story was that Jane had died in a bear attack, a convenient lie to cover the truth. I didn't like it, but it wasn't my call to make. We were given some time off, a chance to recover and regroup. I spent those days in quiet reflection, haunted by the memories of that cave and the creature that dwelled within. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting for its next victim. The world is full of dark, hidden corners, places where the light of civilization doesn't reach. We're the ones sent to explore those places, to confront the monsters that lurk in the shadows. In the end, we're just human, facing things we were never meant to understand. But we do it because someone has to. We do it because the alternative is to let the darkness win, and as long as I'm still breathing, I'll keep fighting, no matter the cost. That's the job. That's the reality of hunting monsters. 3 weeks after the incident, I sat in a sterile conference room at headquarters, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in front of me. Director Holloway had called us in for what she termed a follow-up briefing, but I suspected there was more to it. Sam and Max looked as haggard as I felt. None of us had been sleeping well. The dreams were always the same, running through endless tunnels while something scuttled behind us, gaining with every step. The containment team completed their work, Holloway began without preamble, sliding folders across the table. The cave has been sealed with reinforced concrete and the area declared off limits due to geological instability. I opened the folder to find photos of the operation. Heavy machinery, hazmat suits, armed guards maintaining a perimeter. The final image showed the cave entrance completely blocked, steel rebar protruding from the concrete like skeletal fingers. Did they find anything? I asked. Any sign of... Jane's remains were recovered, Holloway interrupted, her voice softening slightly. As for the entity, there was no trace. Either it was destroyed in the explosion or it escaped, Sam finished, his face grim. Holloway nodded. We've stepped up surveillance in the area. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, regular patrols. If it's still out there, we'll find it. What about the markings? Max asked. Did the team document them before sealing the cave? Holloway pushed another folder toward us. Our linguists and anthropologists have been analyzing the symbols. They don't match any known human language or pictographic system. The photos showed the strange carvings in detail, angular glyphs, and disturbing figures that seemed to shift and move, even in the static images. Looking at them for too long made my head ache. Their preliminary assessment is that these markings predate human settlement in the region, Holloway continued. Carbon dating of organic material embedded in the deeper carvings suggests they're at least 15,000 years old. So whatever that thing was, it's been there a long time, I murmured. The question is whether it's unique or if there are more of them, Sam added. The thought had been haunting me as well. If one such creature could exist, hidden from human discovery for millennia, how many others might be out there? We're cross-referencing similar disappearances nationwide, Holloway said, as if reading my thoughts. Looking for patterns that might indicate other entities with similar hunting behaviors. And Emily Dawson? I asked. Her family deserves closure. Official report lists her as presumed dead, body unrecoverable due to predator activity, Holloway replied. Her parents were told a mountain lion was responsible. More lies, more cover-ups. Sometimes I wondered if we were doing the right thing, hiding the truth from the public. But then I remembered the panic that would ensue if people knew what really lurked in the dark corners of the world. As for Emily Dawson, her fate remained a mystery. Her body wasn't among those in the cave, leaving a small, bitter hope that she might still be out there, alive. We added her to the list of missing persons, another name in a file that seemed to grow longer every day. The unit moved on to the next case, always one step behind the things that go bump in the night. We never talked about Jane after that, not directly, but her memory lingered, a silent reminder of the price we pay for standing between the world and the darkness. 2 months later, I was back in the field, investigating cattle mutilations in Oklahoma that turned out to be the work of a cult, rather than anything supernatural. The work continued, an endless cycle of reports, investigations, and containment. But my thoughts often returned to that cave in Oregon, to the creature with too many teeth and eyes that glowed in the dark. I checked the surveillance reports weekly, looking for any sign that it had returned. The winter passed, then spring. The forests of the Pacific Northwest bloomed with new life, covering the scars of our encounter. Hikers returned to the trails, unaware of the danger that had once stalked those woods. I began to hope that perhaps we had succeeded after all, that Jane's sacrifice had not been in vain, that the creature had been trapped or killed in the explosion, its ancient hunger finally extinguished. Then came the call that shattered that fragile hope. 3 hikers missing near Mount Jefferson, Director Holloway said, her voice tight. 2 bodies recovered. The injuries matched the pattern. My blood ran cold. Mount Jefferson was over 100 miles from our original encounter. It's moved, I said, already reaching for my go-bag. Or there's more than one. Team is assembling at the Portland field office, Holloway replied. Wheels up in 3 hours. I've seen things that defy explanation, faced horrors that would break most men. But it's not the monsters that haunt me. It's the people left behind, the missing and the dead, their stories unfinished. In the quiet moments when the world is still and the night is dark, I hear their whispers. And I know that as long as there are monsters, there will be hunters like me ready to face them. That's the job. That's the reality. And it's a reality I've come to accept. The helicopter set down in a clearing not far from the base of Mount Jefferson. The mountain loomed above us, its peak shrouded in clouds, indifferent to the horror unfolding in its shadow. Sam and Max flanked me as we disembarked, each carrying more firepower than we had in Oregon. We weren't taking any chances this time. A local ranger met us, his face drawn with stress and lack of sleep. 3 days ago, a group of 5 hikers went up the East Trail, he explained as we loaded our gear into a waiting jeep. Only 2 made it back. They were hysterical, talking about something coming out of the trees, something that moved wrong. And the bodies? I asked. Found yesterday, about 4 miles up the trail. It's not pretty. The ranger wasn't exaggerating. The scene was eerily similar to what we'd found in the cave months earlier. Bodies partially consumed, strange puncture wounds, tissues around the wounds showing signs of chemical decomposition. As if the creature's saliva contained some sort of digestive enzyme that liquefied flesh. Same MO, Sam confirmed, crouching beside one of the bodies. But this is fresh, less than 24 hours. It's hunting, Max said quietly, and getting bolder. We established a base camp and began our search, methodically covering the area where the attacks had occurred. The forest here was different from the dense coastal woods of our previous encounter, more open, with less undergrowth, offering fewer places for something large to hide. Yet the sense of being watched was even stronger, a constant prickling at the back of my neck that made me twitch at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. Night fell, and we continued our search by spotlight and thermal imaging. Max had developed a new drone with enhanced infrared capabilities, designed specifically to detect the unusual heat signature we'd recorded from the creature. I've got something, he said around midnight, hunched over his tablet, 300 yards northwest, moving parallel to the ridgeline. We moved in formation, weapons ready, communication limited to hand signals. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light through the trees and creating pools of deep shadow that seemed to shift and move. The drone's feed showed the heat signature growing stronger, more defined. Whatever we were tracking was large, at least 7 feet tall, and moving with the same jerky, insect-like motion I remembered all too well. Visual contact, Sam whispered, pointing ahead. There it was, moving between the trees, the same elongated limbs, the same mottled gray skin. It was dragging something behind it, a dark mass that left a wet trail on the forest floor. On my mark, I breathed, raising my rifle. 3, 2. The creature stopped suddenly, its head swiveling in our direction. Those glowing eyes seemed to look directly at me, through me, into some part of myself I didn't know existed. And then it was moving, not away from us, as expected, but directly toward us, covering ground with impossible speed. Fire! I shouted, and our weapons erupted in unison. This time we were better prepared. Incendiary rounds punched through the creature's torso, igniting on impact. It shrieked, that same metal-on-metal sound that haunted my dreams, and thrashed wildly as flames spread across its body. But still it came, burning and wounded, driven by hunger or rage or some alien emotion we couldn't comprehend. It crashed into our line, sending Sam flying with a sweep of its arm. Max emptied his magazine into it point blank, the muzzle flash illuminating its grotesque face in stark relief. I circled behind it, drawing my sidearm loaded with special hollow points filled with white phosphorus. I emptied the clip into the back of its head, each impact causing a small explosion of searing white light. The creature collapsed, its limbs twitching and spasming. Black ichor pooled beneath it, hissing and steaming where it touched the ground. "Is it dead?" Max asked, reloading with shaking hands. "Not taking any chances," I replied, removing a thermite grenade from my pack. "Back up." The grenade detonated in a blinding flash, engulfing the creature in flames hot enough to melt steel. We watched in grim silence as it burned, the stench of it acrid and alien. When the flames finally died down, nothing remained but a blackened smear on the forest floor and a few fragments of bone-like material that refused to burn. "Bag those," I told Max, pointing to the fragments. "Full containment protocol." We recovered the item it had been dragging, the partial remains of one of the missing hikers. The poor soul hadn't stood a chance against such a predator. As dawn broke, we swept the area one final time before calling in the cleanup team. The official story would be a forest fire caused by illegal campers, explaining the scorched earth and any lingering evidence of our confrontation. "You think that's the end of it?" Sam asked as we watched the containment team work, his arm in a sling from his encounter with the creature. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe it was the same one from Oregon. Maybe it was another of its kind. Either way, there could be more out there. If there are, we'll find them," Max said with uncharacteristic fierceness. "For Jane." I nodded, surveying the mountain wilderness stretching to the horizon. So much territory. So many places for things to hide. And beyond these forests, there were deserts and swamps, mountains and plains, oceans and caves. Countless environments where the unknown could lurk, watching and waiting. Back at headquarters, the fragments we recovered were sent to a specialized lab for analysis. Preliminary results confirmed what I had suspected. The material matched nothing in our databases, its molecular structure unlike any known terrestrial organism. "The question remains," Director Holloway said during our debriefing. "Are these isolated incidents, or are we seeing the beginning of a pattern? If they're coming out of hiding, there must be a reason," I pointed out. "Environmental changes, human encroachment on their territory, something triggering more aggressive behavior. Or maybe they've always been hunting us," Sam suggested quietly, "and we're just getting better at noticing." The thought chilled me. How many missing persons over the centuries, over the millennia, might have fallen prey to these creatures? How many unexplained disappearances might have been attributed to accidents or exposure when something far more sinister was responsible? In the weeks that followed, we compiled reports of similar attacks and disappearances, creating a map of potential hotspots across the country. Patterns emerged. Clusters of incidents around certain mountain ranges, deep forests, remote coastlines, places where the boundaries between our world and whatever lay beyond seemed thinnest. We became more proactive, deploying teams to investigate areas before people went missing, setting up monitoring systems, working with local authorities to restrict access to high-risk locations without revealing the true nature of the threat. It wasn't a perfect system. People still disappeared. Bodies were still found bearing those distinctive wounds. But we were learning, adapting, becoming more effective hunters of the hunters. As for me, I continued to lead field operations, each mission adding to our knowledge, each encounter honing our tactics. The nightmares became less frequent, replaced by a cold determination to protect those who would never know the dangers that lurked in the shadows. I've spent my life in pursuit of things that shouldn't exist, standing at the border between the known world and the mysteries beyond. It's a lonely existence, marked by secrets and loss, by questions that may never be answered. But when I think of the alternative, of these creatures roaming unchecked, of families never knowing what happened to their loved ones, I know the cost is worth paying. So I keep my go bag packed, my weapons loaded, my mind open to possibilities that most would dismiss as impossible. I watch the shadows, listening for sounds that don't belong, always ready for the call that will send me back into the darkness. Because that's who I am. That's what I do. I'm Alton Merton, and I hunt the things that hunt us.